Call this meeting to order. It's a regular meeting of the Montana Board of Public Education. Today is Friday, July 18th. It is 8:30 in the morning. And we'll begin with our pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chris, will you please call the roll?
Kurt Clark,
Here.
Ron Singer,
Here.
Lisa Schmidt,
Here.
Julia Maxwell.
Here.
Madeline Quinlan.
Here.
Hannah Neeskins.
Here.
Renee Rasmussen,
Here.
Lydia Comstock,
Excuse.
Superintendent Evelyn.
Here. Here.
Commissioner Christian's office, Governor Gene Fortune's office.
Thank you. The Montana Board of Public Education encourages the public to participate in board discussions. Persons who wish to participate should sign the public comment sign-in sheet and identify themselves to the board chair or executive director prior to the board's consideration of the matter in which the persons are concerned. Anyone wishing to participate in board discussion will be recognized by the chairperson in keeping with normal board parliamentary procedure. We discourage public comment on personnel matters and ask that you discuss these issues in private with the board chair. Montana Board of Public Education is a professional development unit provider. Attending a Board of Public Education meeting may qualify you to receive professional development units. Please complete the necessary information on the sign-in sheet if you are applying for professional development units. At this point, I'll see, do we have any visitors who wish to be recognized? All right. So we will go in with our agenda. We have 7 agenda items today to wrap up our July meeting, and they are all underneath the accreditation committee. So I'll hand things over to our accreditation chair, Quinlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item number 20 is the Indian Education for All report, and we want to welcome Christy Mark Stutz and Mike Jetty.
Chair Hart and Committee Chair Quinlan. I'm Christy Mockstutz, MOCK-STUTC. I'm the Assistant Chief Program Officer at USPI.
Amitaki Api, Wambali Snala Bielo, Bihani Waistero, that's WANBLI. ISNALN. Mike Jetty, Office of Public Instruction, Internet for All Specialists. I just said it's a good morning. And my other name is actually Wambali Snala, and that translates into Lomi. So good morning.
Morning. Well, we are here to present the Indian Education for All report to you this morning. We're going to take a little bit of a dive into the accreditation reports, the information that schools submit to the OPI regarding their Indian Education for All programming, and the evidence of the work that they're doing in their schools and districts across the state. So we're going to walk through that a little bit this morning. And Mike will be sharing the thought about the implementation that our EFA department and EFA specialists are doing as well. So let's start on page 183 of your packet. Page 183. And the first graphic on that page is a look at the accreditation report, the final report of the scores from the accreditation system. So there's a link there for you all to access that. And you can see that every district and school is listed, and all of the rubrics are listed across the top, the rubric letters, and then the score that those schools and districts received on those various rubrics. We're going to focus today on the J, K, the M rubrics, because those are specific to Indian Education for All. So that's what we'll be taking a look at today. So on the next page, you'll see rubric J. And this rubric is really about the implementation at the district. Do they have policies and programs aligned in their educational programming aligned to Indian Education for All? How are they implementing that? How are they providing evidence to us? What evidence do they provide? And you can take a look there to be regular to get a score of 4 on this rubric. You can see that they need to provide several things there under that regular rubric. And some of the sample evidence that they include, maybe uploading their district policy. It might be including a scope and sequence or a curriculum map. You can see at the bottom there, there's some school examples of photos of students actually implementing and working with lessons. And the ones on the right there, the star quilt activity, that's one of OPI's making a star quilt lesson, and they provided evidence they're using that in their classrooms. So that's some of the evidence that they've provided for this rubric, and that's what we're looking at on for rubric J.
But for me, being a longtime Indian ed specialist, it's exciting to see all the materials schools are putting together and sharing with OPI, because we've never had this level of data before. And it is really painting a more comprehensive picture of what's happening at the classroom level. And so it is exciting, and so revitalizing the program, basically. It's like, neat to see, so.
Absolutely, and this comes up in a large spreadsheet. Specialists can look at the evidence that schools submitted so that they can understand what schools are doing, and then maybe seeing, oh, schools that might need some extra support, and reach out to those schools. So that our specialists are using the information submitted here to provide targeted support as well. You'll hear a little more about that, right? That's more information to share. On the next page, we're going to go to rubric K. This is particular, this is sort of where the submissions here in the accreditation system will sort of dovetail with the fiscal reporting. And these are the assurances. And so these, all schools need to assure that they're using their Indian Education for All funding appropriately and sign off on that. And so you can see at the bottom of this page that has rubric K at the top, at the bottom, there's a screenshot of what they actually see in the system when they go in to make those assurances and sign off on that. This is the rubric that then gets transferred over to our school finance, and they can check off like, yes, the school submitted these assurances, and then it kind of coordinates with that finance piece as well. And then on the next page at the top, schools can check all of this can give us really high level, state level qualitative data, these check marks. Schools go in and they submit what they actually are using that funding for or planning to use the funding for. Is it for curriculum and instruction materials? Is it for field trips? Is it to have a guest speaker come? Those types of things. They'll check that off, and we'll get a little more into that on the next page. I have some tables for you to look at. And then let's take a look at rubric M, which is on the bottom of this next page. And this is a rubric that is really based on the curriculum review. Traditionally, this has been where schools think about identifying their curriculum review process, but you can see in this rubric, there's actually 3 pieces that they need to submit to be regular, to get a 4 or a regular score on this rubric. And these pieces you'll see the bottom one is that schedule for revising curriculum standards at least every 5 years, or consistent with our state standards revision schedule. That's something schools do. We've been doing that a long time. But if you look at the other options up here that they need to include, a cooperatively developed and implemented proficiency-based learning model, and a process for reviewing curriculum, instructional materials, and resources to ensure the inclusion of the distinct and unique cultural heritages and contemporary portrayal of American Indians in the curriculum. And when we think about the conversations that you've been having this week, particularly Wednesday with Macy, and a lot of that tribal consultation, I think this bullet point here, this rubric could be that really good beginning of that tribal consultations. Fewer districts reach out saying, we're working on reviewing our curriculum. I think that would be a good entry point to some of that tribal consultation.
We provide a lot of support for mapping curriculum and then just putting plans together for IFA, so that fits perfectly with this rubric item.
So then if you turn to go to the next page, you'll see some tables. And these are from that rubric A, those assurances that schools are checking off. And this gives us this high level look at what schools are reporting that they're using their IFA funds for. And you'll notice that most schools, that first box there on the upper left, they're purchasing quality instructional materials. That's what a lot of the IFA funds would go for. But you'll also see that they are paying for consultation. They're using staff time devoted to development of inquiry-based depth of study that is cooperatively with the advice and assistance of Montana tribes. And you'll notice that that has the most no's. Last year it did as well, but we noticed a little change in it this year. A little bit less no's, a few more yeses this year. And I think that's in part because our Indian Education for All specialists have been working with our schools to move in that direction. Again, talked this week, we know there's more to go there, but I think this shows some movement in that direction. And really is a place we look forward to seeing more growth in, with the work on next spring.
So what constitutes a qualified Indian Ed for All specialist?
And are you, I'm sorry, Chair Quinlan, for, are you talking about the bottom one that qualified Indian Ed for all?
Well, I'm talking about that second, expenses associated with consultation or training.
In this case, this would be, one of our specialists from, yeah, in that particular question, that's what most schools would be responding to.
Thank you.
And then another slight change that we noticed on the bottom graph there, the compensation for staff time. I was jumping here next, Chair Quinlan on this one, but and the amount of time devoted to an event coordinator instructor, very similar to what it was last year, but we noticed a little bit of a change. And we think that's also because schools are really working to integrate this throughout their curriculum as well. So we think that that was a positive for that part as well. In some of the data just comparing from last year to this year. So what schools have submitted in the accreditation system, they've submitted all of their accreditation information and this rubric K for these fiscal reports. Then the second part of their fiscal reporting to the OPI comes, and I know we've talked about this before, in their trustee financial summary. That's due September 15th through the Mayfair system in our school finance department. And as a reminder, schools do get a flag when they're in the Mayfair system, getting ready to submit their information on the Indian Education for All funding. Little flag pops up and says, hey, your revenue for Indian Education for All is different than what you're reporting you expended. Do you want to double check that? It gives them that reminder. And then after September 15th, our school finance will have to reach out to any schools that show a discrepancy in their final reporting, and they have till December the 10th to make a correction if they need to. And then all of this reporting then comes together to work on to really impact the reporting for next year, their finance for next year. And you can see on skip a page, there is the amounts, the allocated amounts of EFA funding for each district. You'll see that in your packet as well for the upcoming school year. We had just a handful of schools this year that have an adjusted EFA amount that they wouldn't get anything. They did not get any EFA funding on their preliminary budget they reported in March, but most schools did. See that most schools will be receiving that funds in this chart. But those reports combined, programmatic reports that they're submitting, combined with their trustee financial summary, is what impacts their any reduction if they have a reduction in their funding.
Then we worked with school finance to put together a guidance document for the expenditure to apply to put in the coding. So this word you can use it for and really try to provide some your clear guidance.
Yeah.
What they could use the dollars for. So we want it all spent up. We don't want any of this money left.
And this is a really perfect segue, I think, unless there are more questions, over to Mike to talk about how our EFA specialists are supporting all of our schools, and how they can really leverage these EFA funds to meet the rubrics that we just talked about in accreditation and for their fiscal reporting. So I will answer questions, but we'll be here, so move on to Mike to share the implementation side.
Any questions from board members? Please go on.
All right, so the other side of this is putting together the resources and curriculum materials to go along to help teachers support that. We were really working on providing knowledge, skills, and resources so they can implement Indian Ed for All in a culturally responsive manner. And so during the past year, we revised a school needs assessment survey, and any school that reaches out, we send them this survey. It's called Qualtrics, and they resend it back to us, but it gives us a real good picture of the local needs. And so we're really trying to tailor our professional development ways that are, ongoing and job embedded and incorporating best practices for PD as they implement Indian Ed for All. So we're really working on that and, being proactive in how we're actually reaching out to districts to provide that support. If they haven't spent all their funds, if they've got a low score on their rubric for Indian Ed for All, we contact them, set up meetings with the administrators, and say, what could we do to provide supports? And maybe put them in touch with other folks that can help at the local level. So that's one aspect of it, and that's really been neat to develop those relationships, move beyond the one and done kind of workshop model. So we're really working on that. Christie said all the ISAC and financial reports just help paint a good picture of what is happening and how we can best provide supports. We've got a great partnership with SAM and presenting at their conferences and presenting in a couple weeks. And they send out stuff via their newsletters. So basically any educational entity we try and partner up with, help put our message out, university system, and partner up with them. And so other regional support groups. And we also had our best practices conference here at Helena at East Helena High School. And we had over 200 people attend. That was pretty exciting to see. And so that continues. We've got curriculum mapping. And we're putting models together about how teachers can map their curriculum out K through 12 different content areas. And it plug in their own local efforts. And so we're putting some of that out there, just trying to really make it. Here's how you can do it. Here's some of our existing resources, some places to start. And we've got some cool stuff happening with how teachers, administrators are collecting the data. I like to brag up Frenchtown. And Frenchtown, like once a month, they'll send out a Google survey to their staff. They just fill out what they've done with Indiana for all that month, maybe a sample work or a lesson plan. And they just collect that, but then one of their principals actually posts it on their school website. And so a parent or any community member can go in there and see, hey, this is what's happening with Indiana for All, Frenchtown. And it's exciting. And so I know some schools are really, taking it to heart, trying to figure out the best ways to collect the data that doesn't overburden teachers, but just how can you keep weaving this into what you're doing to meet those standards you have to teach to anyway, using some American Indian content and context. And of course, we got hub courses on our website. That's really cool that every teacher getting certified has to take an Internet for All intro course. I think we'll be developing a second one of those. And so that's exciting too. I'm looking forward to that. Then we have a YouTube channel with over 300 videos that feature tribal leaders and cultural experts sharing their perspectives on a wide range of topics. We've got online resources for TD. And last year, 1,800 teachers completed our hub courses. And we met over 2,600 teachers with our in-person and virtual outreach curriculum. And then we also partner up with the Big Sky Film Festival. Anybody ever go to that? And they have documentary films made by Indigenous filmmakers. And so they get permissions from the filmmakers to screen these films in schools throughout Montana. And then the filmmakers and the subjects of the films actually do a Q&A live with classrooms across Montana. So we're doing that partnership again. And that reached over 2,700 students in 42 different schools last year. And so, just good projects that we're working with. We've got some curriculum materials. We're updating our powwow guide. Who's ever been to a powwow before? And so we've got descriptions of every category, pictures of Montana dancers from every category, links to it so teachers can see the different styles of dances. But then we also embedded our lesson plans that go back to the content standards about what they can teach, what skills they can get learning about powwows. And so that's fun. And speaking of powwows, when I first started singing at the drum at powwows, the lead singer told me he wanted me to sing tenor. I said, sing higher. He said, no, 10 or 12 miles away. So there's bad joke. Like you've got a math lesson plan for the Star Quilt lesson plan about angles and stuff, measurement, and how much material cloth you need. But then we also have, that's built into our lesson plan for the powwow, because star quilts can be gifted at powwows. And so make sure to put our math lesson about star quilts in there. But then we also have a math lesson called Powwow Trails, where you estimate mileage. How much money does it cost to go to Browning to Heart Butte, or Heart Butte over to Poplar, and mileage. And so, just little real world skills kids can use, they're learning about the contemporary powwow celebrations. And we're also working on a curriculum for MMIP. And based around the new children's book that's come out, so those resources are coming out. Teacher from Miles City sent a lesson plan about auto shop, which was pretty cool, looking at names of automobiles and cars and helicopters that are named after American Indians. And what's the history behind that? So just a way to weave in Internet for All and auto shop. We've been talking to Ag about digging sticks, traditional digging sticks for bitterroot, camas and prairie turnips. But then we said, well, why not have a noxious leaf digging stick? Some student could take home and take out, knapweed in their yard or something, or use it for their garden. But then they're learning about tribal traditions at the same time. So anyway, a lot of good stuff going on. I could talk a long time. I just joined a support group for people who talk too much. Yeah.
McCall would like to be.
It's called On and
I've been
On.
there. I'm
Called
ready.
On and On. Anyway, we'll open it up to questions if anybody has any, but we've got a team of IFA specialists, so it's not just me working on this. We have, Carrie McNabb, Julie Jeffers, and then also our tribal relations and student achievement team partner with us on curriculum. And a good example of that is the Morning Greetings Project that Michelle Henson did, where she recorded tribal cultural knowledge keepers sharing a positive message. And the students just play in the morning, or the teachers for their classes or over the PA. And so one of mine, I sang the La Culpa flag song. Instead of saying the pledge, they hear a flag song. And other folks have just given a little positive message based on a traditional tribal value. Like a teacher in Townsend asked me, you gonna be doing any more of those the next school year? I'm like, yeah, we are. And so they're getting used in places across Montana. So anyways. I'm actually gonna record one after this meeting, so. Hey, so questions, they're all on our YouTube channel.
Questions for board member Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have several questions. So, first of all, the conference, okay, I love it. I would like to attend it. So if I could find out the dates for next year and things, I actually would encourage other board members who haven't been. I think that could be a wonderful best practices for us at conference. So of the 200 attendees, how many school districts were represented?
Wow, quite a few. We had teachers from, I could find out exactly how many, but several dozens of schools.
So my follow-up to that would be, are we intentionally inviting or requiring school districts that are performing low in their education for all metrics to attend? Or, I mean,
We
to me,
strongly
it's-
have encouraged them to. We have, when we met with them prior to the conference, we said, here are PD opportunities coming up.
Good.
And so we do, we try and really promote that with schools that, could use some assistance.
So, okay, and I think promotion's great, requirements another thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I would encourage, I don't know who has that stick, but if it's OPI or whatever. I would say that if your school district scores 2 or lower, you are mandated to attend that, because they need to see that. So then the best practices are those, I'm excited about hearing you talk about all the resources developed. I'm actually, I want to dig into that. So is there then some sort of best practices document or collection of those that's sent to school districts that is, instead of them having to come search it out, it's actually delivered to them and said, here, it seems to me you have some people that are just, as in all things, excelling and really doing some great things, have pedagogy involved. I mean, if the examples you gave are fantastic, we need to make sure everyone's doing that, those types of things,
So
right?
we have these 80 webinars that are on our
Yeah.
YouTube channel. A lot of those feature our presenters that are from the classroom.
Yes,
Sharing what they're doing, and those are available asynchronous on our website right now. And then we have ones for math, we have ones for ethnobotany. Last year we had a webinar series that featured every content area. So once a month, we had a teacher from a school in Montana sharing what's working in the classrooms. So we really try and promote best practices, and actually present at our conference as teachers. So
I'm excited to attend it next year.
we'll make sure we get some call the info when we have it.
I'm sure you have several.
Board member Maxwell.
I was going to ask, so, we at Marion School underwent a huge project to create, just all of our money went to buying resources and binders with lesson plans pre-printed for, just so it was easier for our teachers. And our teachers worked really, really hard to create some really awesome ones also to kind of, I don't know, make it, so can teachers submit if they're like, this lesson plan is amazing? Can
We
we
have a little
submit?
submit a lesson plan button on our website.
Okay.
And so then we put out the guidance about what we'd like to see before you submit it, like if there's a permission issue. You know, if there's a picture in there or something, make sure you got the permission from whoever, or, you know, so yeah, we do have a little ways the teachers can submit, like. A professor at MSU Billings, Elaine Westbrook, had all of her students submit lesson plans to OPI last year. Looked at some, we've got some posted on our website, those are in our queue to check out. But yeah, so like that teacher from Miles City just shooting a lesson to us too, you guys use it, but we do have a spot on our website, so.
I
If you
just,
wanna share stuff from Marion, we're happy to put it
teacher,
out there, like we just linked to other schools too, like that have websites. Check out Billings, check out Missoula.
I just remember being taught in college, teaching is beg, borrow and steal. Never recreate what's already great, so I wanted to make sure teachers know that they could send in things and everyone can benefit.
Yeah, that's exactly it, so yeah, you got good stuff, share it with us, that's how all of our stuff is developed. Thank you.
Board Member Rasmussen.
Just really quick, what is I'm on YouTube, what is your YouTube channel?
It's just Indian Education for All Montana,
Okay, thank you.
and you'll see all the readings pop up there. At first, but you can look at our playlist too, like we've got Star Stories on our YouTube channel. And the Ethel Blocking webinar series, so anyway, there's a lot of videos on.
Board Member Neeskin.
So 2 days ago, we met with Macy and we had a lot of discussion around meaningful tribal consultation and what did that mean necessarily. But also that sometimes finding local knowledge keepers was difficult depending on your proximity to one of the reservations in Montana and potentially that there was some sort of effort happening between Macy and OPI where a list was being compiled of knowledge keepers from across the state. So that schools would have more resources that are closer to them. Can you speak a little bit?
Oh,
about
yeah,
that?
right now there is a small list of tribal knowledge keepers that was developed initially by Donnie Wetzel, who used to work with tribal relations in our office, so we still have that group that we work with. But we're expanding that, like back in April, Kerry McNabb, we're up on the Fort Peck Reservation. We went from Glasgow to Culberson, met with every school in between. And we met with the tribal college president, Craig Smith, and he wants to develop that list through the college. And so it's like we were just at Stone Child College 2 weeks ago, last week, for professional development. And one of their knowledge keepers gave me his name and number and said, we're ready to go out and share stuff. And so I got his info. And so we're starting to collect people at the local level that wanna, be a part of this effort. And I was just reminded this morning that as part of the new Indian Head for All legislation, this past session is strongly encouraging schools to use class 7 teachers as professional development. So we're reaching out to them, saying how many of our class 7 language and culture teachers would be willing to be a resource for another school. And so that's exciting. So we have pockets of folks, but we're gonna expand that and hopefully have regional knowledge keepers that, are people that can go out and do, culturally relevant guest speaking lectures or, PD too. Not just, the knowledge stuff, but also here's ways to, map the curriculum. Yeah, so no, we're working on that.
Other board members? Chair Hart?
Yeah, Chris, if you take a look at what's beginning on page 189, the FY 26 budgets.
Yes.
We've got schools that failed to report expenditures and there's gonna be reductions. I guess I got a comment and then a question there. I of course found my 2 schools. One of my schools knocks it out of the park. I so blessed. I have 2 employees there who are who work for the Park Service. They're rangers at Fort Union, Fort Buford, and so they know this stuff inside and out. I mean, for white folk, they should know a lot about the Plains Indians, and they do a great job. And then I got my other little school with just 6 kids. And so they are on the list of to be reduced because quite honestly, $148, what are we gonna do with that? And is it worth, and just to be blunt, it's not worth the time it takes to report. And so it's not a big deal for that money reduction. However, when we look at page 189, we do see several schools that have some significant reductions. You talked about the process on that, of those schools been informed, and is there any way for them ever to get that back?
Yes.
So can you talk about that?
Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And this did come out on their preliminary budget data sheet, so they've known since those came out in March. So they were aware of that. And the way that the money, it will reset back to their expected amount. It's not like it comes the new amount over. With their reporting and follow-up, we'll be able to ensure that they can get their anticipated full amount. So
Yeah,
add to that.
just need to spend all this, but they've been
yes,
reduced.
spend all this and then they can get their original amount. That makes sense.
Then we'll be reaching out like we did last time too, saying, hey, you know, how can we help you spend your funds in appropriate ways? So,
And quite honestly, at least one or two of these on here really surprises me. And I can't, well, it's called blame you. How did they not spend the money? Is that does that come down to a fiscal issue in the business office, or that just doesn't make sense to me why they wouldn't have done it?
And I know from some anecdotal things, talking to teachers, it might have been an administrative turnover, you know, somebody not knowing that they needed to actually, that was in the contract.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But we know, that's why we're really trying to partner up with Sam, got more, get that message out to administrators saying, hey. Make sure you're using your funds in appropriate ways, but use all of it, you know, don't leave any left out.
In our school finance folks went out with NASDO and in there to really work with those new clerks, because again, clerks have a lot of turnover as well, so we're working with them. And presenting at their conferences as well to make sure that the support is getting out to support those folks as well.
Speaking of, you know, math, we're working with one of our math specialists on new math standards to make sure we've got culturally relevant math things, that's the read unit, but that's exciting. to See some of that work going on as far as, you know, the new content, so. And I just talked to a math teacher, and he said he's making a graph of all of his past relationships. And it's got an x-axis and a WHY axis. That, you know.
I was hoping for one joke, we've now had three. I have a couple of questions for you. That was very funny. First of all, it is so great to see this report with the good things that are happening, and I just really got excited when I saw 50,000 views of the 310 videos. It was a struggle the last couple of years to negotiate a settlement with in the yellow kidney case, because it felt like it was about what we weren't doing, and we didn't have an opportunity through any of that to showcase the good things that are happening. And so it's wonderful to see this, and we certainly acknowledge that there are things we have to do better. I was gonna ask you about, are there any curricular areas that are more challenging than others, but you seem to have covered it all by the time you covered on.
No, we need like more math. And,
Math.
you know, more art relevant too, like we've got some music resources. But you know, actually stuff you could do with like an orchestra or a band. So we're looking for that kind of stuff still. But
Okay.
it's not to say it can't be done.
And then we talked on Wednesday with the representatives from Macy about and Chair Tharp raised this as well this morning, that there are districts that are getting such a small amount of money, they're saying, forget it, we're not gonna focus any of these resources on Indian Ed. What's happening in the world of creating consortiums? And perhaps Rob Watson wants to get in on this question too, but I thought the 2025 legislature actually made some of the consortium work easier or more areas, and I may be wrong about that, but if districts could pool either through their regional service areas or something like that. Is that a way to help pool enough money to actually do something for a region of schools?
Saying nothing, saying they couldn't do that, like, we worked with Prairie View Curriculum Consortium quite a bit. I came out to Eastern Montana through Kim Stanton. I was trying to make sure it was embedded in what they're doing with their consortium. So I know, it's like when they reach out, we partner up with them. We co-presented with ACE last year at SAM. It is curriculum consortium. So
She's good.
And they could code that expenditure as Indian Ed for All, even though it might be paid to a,
yeah, so they can show that it's somehow, track it, saying
Right.
we're actually,
Yeah.
this is being an expenditure that's supporting EFA dollars. So they have to somehow document what they're getting out of it. Here with us.
thank you, Mike. Board Member Rasmussen.
Just real quick, I'm from the Eastern End and know Kim very well. But when you were talking about curriculum mapping and, 200 people attending a conference, it's, for me, that's 7 to 10 years ago, and that's exactly what was going on back then. When the Indian Ed for All standards came out, there was curriculum mapping going on in a lot of schools that around where I was, and the EFA conference that Prairie View put on was. If you were around that long, you can remember that was good. So I'm glad to see that we're back to some of those, but it seems like the old is, new again.
And some of this seems almost cyclical.
Yeah.
If you got a
Thank you.
group of folks coming up, we just learn and then do some better stuff if we do that circle again. But
Well, thank you very much. Any last comments? Dare I offer Mike the?
I've been on the road quite a bit this summer, and so I bought some of those little whistles for my car to keep deer away. Here I put them on backwards and I got deer chasing me.
Yeah.
But thank you.
The illustrious Mike Jenny.
Well, hopefully next year we'll have a lot more stuff to share, whenever you like us to come back again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with your niece.
I feel like I should clap.
Okay. On a roll. The next item 21, Marie Judish will be talking about the economic impact statement for the English language arts.
Good morning, my name is Marie Judish, that's JUDISCH for the record, and I'm Senior Manager of Teaching and Learning. And please expect no jokes, because I can't handle it. I'm excited to be with you today to discuss the economic impact statement that was drafted in alignment with the ELA and literacy content standards. I think we're finally figuring this report out a little bit to see what we need, what kind of information is helpful for the legislators. I'm not gonna go into the weeds, I have to use that for you, on all of these different pieces, but I want to make sure you understand the different components and if there's any revisions we need to make as we, I believe, co-present to legislators in the coming months. You'll see we had a pretty good response this time, much better in the past where I'd only get like 12 or 18. So we got 58 individuals across the state that include teachers, superintendents, principals, district curriculum directors, parents, taxpayers, and technology integration specialists. To guide our discussion a little bit better, I'm actually gonna have you jump, by the way, I was at page 203, to appendix A within the report, so we can go through the different data that was collected. So for me, it's on page, there's the notes, 11 within mine, if you look at those.
213.
Thank you, 213. All right, so we did have a brief look overall from every district side, so see class A, AA, B, all around, and we also had the inclusion of one schoolhouse. So this is suggested by our NRC members in the Montana Small School Alliance, which was a wonderful addition because we know they have much different needs, especially when it comes to costs and per curriculum. Really good comprehensive coverage on that, as well as when it came to those making financial decisions on the stakeholder roles. You'll see largely superintendents as well as curriculum directors and principals were our top respondents there. Going into the graphs, we really wanted to get down to, do you need a full comprehensive curricular review? Do you need some partial? What is the actual need? And you really see that in across the board, yes, they do need a curriculum, whether it's small or big. there is a big need for that. There are very few that said that they absolutely needed nothing. And that could be because they were part of the literacy grant or their district just going at it and they know that the new standards are really aligned with science reading and evidence-based practices. We did have a variance across of what those curricular needs would be associated with. In the past, we just said curriculum. But now we actually dug into, do you need core program? Do you need supplementary? Is it annual consumable intervention material? He just knows how to steal a spotlight.
He does, I know. Do that on purpose, just to have him.
Yeah, please,
distract
you
us.
distract them for me, yes, yeah. Yes, and then technology-based resources, because we know that is a vital tool for our schools to do interventions or whatever enrichment supports they might need. Looking at the cost by grade level, we were pretty close on what we anticipated. Earlier grades tend to cost more, especially if you're looking at those decodable readers and moving into other hands-on materials that are just more expensive in the elementary than they are in later grades. Overall, we had pretty good support for where we anticipated that based on our research at looking at different adoptions that have been done recently. The next question you'll see is focused on if the districts already have the sufficient funding for their curricular needs. We wanted to see, have they already budgeted for that? We know we just are going through math right now, and that these are two big ones along with science in terms of curricular costs. And in large part, it was no, or they are unsure because their role may not give them that information, whether you're a teacher or IT specialist, things like that. So overwhelmingly, it was a no, we do not. However, some felt good about it. I did break down all the open responses from districts and respondents on what they thought would be needed in terms of the different components. So I went into some themes here. So in terms of curriculum alignment and evaluation, it's really all over the map. We had some that just adopted. We have some that have reviewed and already see that it's aligned, so they're good. Some that just adopted and it's not aligned, so they actually need to make some supplemental changes there. Several districts are already conducting curriculum audits, looking at the revisions because they see what's proposed already and updating those scope and sequences. I do think MAST has a lot to do with that because they are paying attention to what standards are being assessed when, so that helps us in that regard. Materials for Indigenous perspectives and deep integration. Mike talked about how the work that's been going on with math and all the other things that they have available. This wasn't actually increased that much in terms of where it was embedded already in the standards, but the research one was increased or more notably pronounced in that. However, there's always more need to make sure that we have the correct resources for our schools. Professional development is going to be, I believe, a larger cost, honestly, than curriculum, even if that wasn't necessarily indicated there. As we look toward those shifts and to evidence-based reading practices that are aligned with standards, that's really going to be, you can use a bad curriculum, but if you know the science of reading the evidence-based practices, you can get your kids there regardless. So that is something that I think maybe was underwhelmingly noted there in terms of what they would need for financing that. System-wide considerations, a lot of opportunity for greater instructional flexibility and innovation with how we revise the standards, how the committee and NRC revise the standards. Just noting that they also need some thoughtful planning and support to see what integration they have there. Curricular costs was really interesting. Some said $50 per class, I'm good, I've got it. And then some said $500 per student. And that is, I mean, that's a wide scale. So when we go to legislators and say, I could be 12 million or 30 million, that's where that's coming from. That's a big difference in those financial considerations. I talked a little bit about the professional development. Like I said, that's overwhelmingly in need across the state. We do have several districts taking the lead in science and reading, but there are still some that indicate they need that. Costs for professional learning, again, all over the map. $0, we can do it in-house, up to more than $2,500 per day. That's a huge cost for those districts, especially the smaller ones. And that is also, I want to know, for when it comes to adopting the curriculum, which may or may not also give them the evidence-based reading practice professional development they would need. That's not necessarily one and the same. And then the number of days again there as well. We also always want to know the format so that we can give the schools what they need for professional learning. Overwhelmingly, in-person professional development would be wonderful for all these districts, of course. We are already working on teacher learning courses. They've been refined to evidence-based practices. I spoke yesterday about the math and implementation professional learning we're doing, so making sure we're addressing that. And moving on, time considerations, you really can't put a dollar sign on the time considerations for the superintendent curriculum directors for what goes into changing their standards. Overwhelmingly, yes, it will have a huge time implication for our staff. However, because K-12, everyone has to teach ELA all 4 years of high school, there won't be a need for increase in core curricular. There was more of an indication of interventionists. However, I don't know if that is because of this change in standard or just because they need interventionists to make sure they're hitting those evidence-based practices. All right.
What do you mean, so what are people intervening in?
Yes, Chair Quinlan, so intervening in, so when you look at those, let's say you're a third grade teacher and you are doing your assessments and you're looking at their diagnostics and your kiddo's not quite there in fluency. So then they might need specialized instruction so that they can have fluency practice, or even break it down further to word decoding, or even break it down to sound by sound decoding, depending on where that student is. They still need that core curriculum, but they may need other interventions in order to get them to work proficiency with their peers. That is, we see that 39% proficiency across the state, and filling those gaps without missing the core is where that's coming in.
Okay, so the interventionists sort of fit into the systems of support.
Yes,
Okay.
very much like that.
Board Member Rasmussen.
Thank you. As I read, your report,
Doesn't quite finish.
oh. Okay, I'll let you finish and then I'll ask questions.
I was gonna jump us back to the conclusion now, so that now that you've seen what all those responses were, if you want to go to page 8 on my number packet, I believe that would be around 211. You'll see where we broke down all the different pieces of where we think those financial implications would come in. I did mention how we need interventions. One of the biggest shifts that you'll see across in terms of implementing evidence-based practices, it's the multisyllabic words and fluency when it comes to 6th through 12th grade. That was the biggest shift that you'll see in those areas, and a lot of indication that they would need what supplementary supports to do that. They can still use the novel studies or the basals that they have, but they would need supplemental if they don't have those instructional. And then fluency can, honestly, you can go print off a cold read off of several different ways, but they may need supplements and time also to bring in those resources. We estimate, if you look at the following page, that there will be an economic impact for these standard revisions, and that's due to the response from the field. Earlier grades have more comprehensive foundational reading standards with the introduction and specificity of the encoding and decoding components that are in there, as well as phonemic awareness. And there's also the impact of the professional development that I mentioned there. So giving a range, because I'm asked to put a number on it, really tricky. Between if everyone had what they needed, saying that with those indicators of 67% of us need a full curriculum, 50 need a partial curriculum, that and then professional learning, it could be anywhere from 12.9 million to 14.5 million across the state. So we're looking about half is what we thought for math, but still it will it is showing that there would be an economic impact with the adoption standards. And now I will stand for questions.
Board Member Rasmussen.
Well, thank you very much. Most of my questions were based off the conclusion, but one of the things that was not clear to me was, especially when you talk about junior high and high school, when you're not talking about elementary anymore, then you're talking about teachers that are often not ELA certified. And as you switch curriculums and you switch things that you're going to test on, that may mean other teachers having to also be acquainted with standards. Did schools account for training, not as much in depth as ELA, of course, but did they talk about training other teachers as well to be able to, especially in the areas of writing, reading informational text?
Chair Graham, Board Member Rasmussen, what's interesting is that there have already been standards for those cross-disciplinary pieces. In fact, we chose to repeal those and then create guidance documents to support those. So I don't think these standards change that necessarily for those educators. However, that need for professional development and resources was there whether or not we changed things. Does that answer your question?
Sure, but with new curriculum and new standards, there still is a need to kind of understand how that fits differently. And so I wondered if schools accounted for that as well. And I didn't see any way to be able to tell that from here.
Chair Quinlan and Board Member Rasmussen, I don't think we got that from the responses yet. That would be good follow-up Yes, sure.
As a follow-up to that, wasn't a new area domain added that was research and inquiry?
Sure.
And so have schools like specifically narrowed in on that, said there's issues related to that?
Chair Quinlan, so yes, technically there's a restructuring that looks like it's a new domain. I have that packet actually up because that's how my brain also works. They were really mostly restructuring those from the writing standards and the reading comprehension beforehand with the introduction of that EFA specific research standard. So that's where we mentioned the EFA resources as being critical. However, they may not have been approached that way in the past. So definitely the professional learning on how to bring those in from what was there to what is there now.
And then another question I have is when school districts adopt curriculum or buy a product, does that often come with professional development for school districts?
Chair Quinlan, it can, it really depends on the package that they purchase. I've had that where we've had a 1 hour webinar with a curriculum developer that's not necessarily beneficial. But I've also had really robust curriculum based professional learning from different vendors. It really depends on the package that they purchase and what they can afford to.
And just one more question. Does OPI have plans to work with the regional services areas to roll this out?
Chair Quinlan, I've already been talking to
Okay.
people like Kim Staton and other curriculum directors on, really want to have our implementation model that we're going to do with math. We're gonna mirror that for ELA. And we're gonna ensure that those curriculum directors as well as consortium providers are included in that. And if they need any other meetings with us, we're already planning on having monthly meetings with people that we can.
Board Member Rasmussen.
I'm sorry, my background is I'm a high school English teacher, so.
Wonderful.
Are you going to be cooperating or coordinating with the IFA people to get ELA teachers specifically, junior high, high school, elementary, but ELA teachers, lists of IFA texts, appropriate IFA texts, so that they have that and they don't have to go searching?
Yes, Chair Quinlan, Board Member Rasmussen, same as what you've seen in the draft of the kindergarten that is about to be posted. I just have to do like my last run there. We are planning on doing the exact same model and making sure that we have hyperlinks to relevant sources, things that are already on the OPI website that we have found out, well, we not know we're there. And external, yeah, we're contacting everyone, and we, like I mentioned with math, we will make sure we reach out to our basic members and get their review of those items as well.
Board Member Rasmussen.
One last one, being as a former superintendent as well as English teacher, I know that people change, English teachers change, superintendents change. So I'd be interested in your attack procedure for getting that information to the classroom teacher, the stuff that they know. Do you target English teachers with their address? Do you target superintendents? Do you target the Kim Stantons of the world and who has a massive, always up to date email list? I would know. What's your attack procedure?
Chair Quinlan, Board Member Rasmussen, I just emailed the team yesterday. I was like, what other newsletters and information do you need? We are going to utilize the listserv for opt-in for educators. We have also with the math, and I'm mirroring this because we plan on doing the same thing. Katrina Elmendram has made one pagers for every role that could touch those math standards. Whether you're the EFA coordinator, you are a tribal college, you've been connecting with a lot of our tribal college education departments. If you're a superintendent, all those pieces, we plan on doing the same things and getting them out there as much as possible. We have found a barrier to get to educators in the past, but we're really trying to overcome that. So we just want all the information at once.
Their board members. Thank you. Before we wrap up, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important to acknowledge that OPI has done a really thorough job here, due diligence in terms of coming up with these numbers, but we're kind of in the same position we were with adopting math standards, which is we have potentially have a $13 to $14.5 million cost. And this will go to the Legislative Education Interim Committee. do I have the right name? Education Interim Committee or Education Interim Budget Committee. But we didn't get any funding for implementation of the math standards, and these would even go into effect before the next, well, these go July 1, 2027. Okay, so again, we would take, we'd make the legislature aware of a possible cost here, a cost here. We'll have to see where that goes. So I just think it's important that we acknowledge there may or may not be resources for this. But I mean, there is the issue of school districts have some money available to do their curriculum work as it is. There's often a discussion about whether there's 5 years for districts to actually adopt a new or implement a new curriculum. I'm not sure if anybody has any comments about that, but yeah, so we have to look for ways to support the districts and acknowledge that we're potentially going to ask for this without being able to offer additional resources. Any other comments?
I did have a dream that we had 3.8 million dollars coming for the math standards, and I woke up and I was like all ready to game plan. I was like, oh, never mind. I'll try to manifest that.
Your dream mode. This is a second dream story we've heard this morning.
With a 3.8 million.
Definitely not.
Maybe that's what you're talking.
Thank you, Marie. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, friends.
It might be helpful for a future board meeting to share a little bit of information from OPI. I'm looking at Julie or Christy about what resources you have within the agency to roll, and Tyler, to roll the work that we talked about here. So, thank you. Yes. Yes, okay, so I am gonna, so our next is the action item on the, we're gonna go out for, what are we doing? We're doing the proposed notice of public hearing and timeline for, the English language arts content standards. So, Marie, or anybody else from OPI, do you wanna make a brief presentation? And then McCall's gonna talk about the time.
I've not planned on
Okay.
making a presentation today, but I would gladly go through anything.
Okay.
I think what we had talked about, and I gave Marie just a quick prep, was if there's anything additional that you wanted to say, or the board members had questions about, that she would sort of sit and just answer those.
Wasn't that a great thought? Is there anything additional you'd like to say?
Sure, Quinlan, and McCall, thank you so much. I've had lots of feedback from the field on these standards and what the committee and the NRC has done. As I drove away from my 5-year-old this morning, I was like, oh my goodness. What she and all these students get in comparison, and even if we just teach the standards, the levels of proficiency in the state are going to go up. We are aligned with research. Our plan of attack for professional learning is gonna be there. With the literacy grant, we can utilize some of those resources that we have coming out of that, we're really excited about. Across the board, are they ever going to be perfect? No, but I'm really, really excited that these are approachable for our educators. They're understandable. We will have the resources there for them. I've read through them so many times. Like I said, they're not perfect, but we are setting our students and our educators up for much more success than what we had in the past. And it's not because those reports good, but I believe in once you know better, you do better, and you support those that are trying to do better in their classroom as well.
Okay, board member Rasmussen.
Your comments were exactly my first stuff okay, we're revising the standards, we're modernizing them. Because I looked at the standards closely in reference to what I would have done as a teacher before. And yes, they're organized differently, and yes, there's different words, but there's really not any change. But if we are saying that this modernization, if this aligning with current research is a good thing, okay, my question is, will it raise achievement, and how are we going to measure that?
Chair Board Member Rasmussen, it's not a silver bullet, right?
Nope.
We know that we need a comprehensive support here, and it can't only be done at OPI as well.
We do have a plan to connect with all of our partners to make sure that professional learning is there and any resources we can to get the evidence-based strategies in the hands of our educators. We have already developed hub courses and have plans to do more with upcoming literacy grant implementation that will be accessed intentionally for the literacy grant schools, but also accessible by everybody. Again, when it comes to measurement, of course, we utilize our tools, and I know there was a mention of literacy grant, what tools would be used there. Third through 8th grade will be masked, and that is done aligned to the standards. We do have some time to align those, and we will have alignment settings done with that. There's like a 2-year turnover for that. But, and also when you looked at them, there's a lot of alignment to what's already there with most of those changes in that K2, K3. So I'm really not too concerned that that's going to change. There will be alignment settings to ensure that, certainly though. Other terms of measurements. The honor state assessment, I know schools use a lot of their own tools, they'll have to make those decisions on what they need for those instructions, especially at that little level. At K2, you still need a tool to measure where they are in their reading. So, any support we can provide schools, not only through us, but through the MTSS work that is done at the agency, and again, connecting with our curriculum partners and consortium, it's gonna be key. We are all about kids in our little room and not one person on the teaching and learning staff in it. So it's just, we will commit to it as much as we can.
And just a general comment about why I asked this, because I put my superintendent hat on. And we're spending lots of money, both at OPI and time and resources. And you saw the schools are going to be spending lots of money, not to create something new, but it will be a reordering of what was done before. But the question then as a superintendent that I have to ask is, will it be worth the time and money? Are we asking teachers to do all this professional development, everyone to go jump through all these hoops to learn all this stuff, school districts, OPI, to spend all this money? The question is, will it, in the end, will that help? And I know that that's a hard question to answer, but I still have to ask it both as formally as a teacher and formally as a superintendent. Are those things worth it? And I think that this board, because we are the ones that ultimately decide, that we have to answer those questions too. So that's why I'm asking.
I'd just like to comment in regards to that thought that I do think it's worth it in large part because there are a number of districts across our state that have not adopted the science of reading. And the new standards and also the financial commitment to the new standards ensures that that is occurring. Really, these are aligned to that research. And so I do think so. And that's in part why I support the coming resolution as well, which also has that verbiage in it.
I just wanted to ask one question and we'll come back. Can you remind us how many districts got the Montana Reads grant and maybe say a little bit about how what they learned through that can be shared with districts that didn't receive the grant?
Yes, sure, Carolyn, I am excited to speak about that. We have 37 districts that are being awarded the literacy grant this upcoming cycle. Across the board, the plan of attack is different than with past cycles of the literacy grant. In the past, it was much more of a consulting model. We kind of rephrased it as we want that individual capacity building happening. So leadership has to be involved in the professional learning. We're going to establish what's called a literacy leadership network, where we had an RFP out that was scored and really driving that literacy leadership network to charge their district with the change. Because if that doesn't happen there, it's not sustainable and it doesn't. You can have one isolated classroom teaching evidence-based practices and none of the rest of them. If you don't have that leadership in that role, then it's not going to be a full system. Along with that, we just approved several professional learning providers that can then contract with districts and ensure that 100% of staff, K-12, mind you, depending on the district stretch, must be trained in science reading. And that was written into our grant application to the federal government, and that they had to indicate that they could do that at the district level. And some districts were like, we just did that, that's great. They will take a pre-assessment on their teacher knowledge skills, and then if there are gaps, they can then find those contractors, those public or professional development providers to fill those gaps. And maybe it's coaching there, maybe it's
How do we do peer-led PLCs, whatever that might be for the classroom. Other components of that will come, it was a 49-page application, what else do I got? A lot of our communities also looking at those cultural relevance and what that means for those communities and making sure that we're looking at the practices within those communities and matching them to best practices with literacy, of course. Literacy leadership member.
And I think that, I appreciate what you're going through that, but maybe how can what they learn
Yeah.
be shared with others?
So, that's why,
Okay.
board member, I just wanted to jump.
Dr.
really
Murphy.
quick. So within that literacy grant, other districts beyond the 37 are going to be able to benefit through a couple of things. We're gonna redesign an entire state literacy plan, that can be utilized across the district. Some of the professional development that we're gonna be offering for these 37 schools will be opened up to other districts, even if they're not part of that literacy grant, to be able to participate in those learning opportunities. And I think another critical piece that relates to the resolution that was brought up, we are working with our EPPs as part of that grant for them to be able to go in and redefine their coursework to align with the science of reading. And so that we'll have that partnership. We're also partnering with our educator preparation programs to put in a mentorship model for these 37 districts, so that they have support directly with another teacher. So that mentorship partnership might mean that this 37 districts might have a mentor that's not in those 37 districts. That mentor might be outside of those 37 districts, and they're getting trained up to support the teachers in some virtual ways. So there will be a couple of different components, whether it's more broad offered professional learning, whether it's through the Montana Literacy Plan that gets updated with a strong focus on science of reading, or whether it's through support of pre-service teachers and revamping that, and then mentorships of building that network of folks around the science of reading to support everyone. We have such wonderful teachers who participated in the previous literacy grants that are ready to step up and be mentors for those that are within the new one, and that'll be done in a virtual fashion. So I just wanted to provide that information to you, that this literacy grant will not only just impact those 37.
Great, thank you.
That's good.
Lisa, I'm sorry, board member Schmidt, I apologize for cutting you off earlier.
No, that was good. I wanna get back to, is it worth it? I think board member Rasmussen has a valid point. And clearly MAST is not up and running. And so how are we measuring success? Can you talk to that?
So board member Rasmussen and Schmidt, I want to answer that question. I think this is a really, really critical question, because is it worth it? That's the question, right? And I think there is such a connection with that assessment to these standards and curriculum and the best practices that we use in teaching that is super critical. So when you look at MAST, it is actually measuring the proficiency of those standards. And it is measuring for 3rd through 8th grade, the informational text and the literary 3 times a year, and then increasing that complexity. It also has that performance task in there about that writing that everybody was concerned about. And then we've learned that across the nation, students are struggling with writing in these performance tasks. We're seeing that across the nation. So I think it's very critical that they're thinking about getting that first window and that information back of telling us, are your students proficient? And then seeing that progress throughout the year to say, as we go to the next one, are they keeping up? Meaning, as that complexity and rigor increases throughout the year, are they maintaining that? And then getting back, for example, that writing information before the end of the year. We have an opportunity with this assessment that no one else in this country has, which is, if your students are not proficient, you don't learn about it in former systems until the students move on to the next year. You're gonna hear about it in October. So what are the conversations we're hosting with our teachers and our educators in that time to say, if they're not proficient, what additional practices do we need to do? How do we start addressing it?
I think that the former proficiency was just put on the shelf. It just kind of sat over here, and then we were looking at, were our students growing? Well, if they're growing a year, but they're 2 years behind, are we given the full picture they're not proficient? And I think that that's uncovering some uncomfort. When I get back a report that I'm seeing that my students aren't proficient in writing, that uncomfort is going to cause movement, which I say it's worth it. But if we keep these things siloed, meaning math sits over here, our standards sit over here, and our curriculum and our best practices sit separately, that's not how it works in the classroom. We gotta be very intentional to be putting all of this together, to be thinking about the impact on the outcomes for our students, which we hope to measure and accredit on student performance.
So I agree with the theory. The theory is wonderful, but MAST isn't working and people aren't using it. So are we ahead of the game asking the school districts to spend $14 million when we don't have a way to measure success yet?
I would say that we are further down the road than anyone. And so is it working yet or not? I think Board Member Schmidt, come November, when those scores come out, is going to be when we have that first real aha. Meaning we're gonna see some districts do really, really well. And we're gonna see some not do very well. And the question then becomes why? And what are we gonna do with that? Because these scores matter, right? And when we start looking at this upcoming year for the federal accountability system, it's gonna be using this year's set of data. And I'm glad about that because it wasn't the first year of implementation with MAST. It's the second rather than the first. And so I feel like we're actually further down the road than we were with Smarter in the previous years. Thank you.
I'm gonna turn over to McCall. She's gonna talk about the timeline. And can you, for the new board members, just explain what this step of notice of proposed public hearing is? And then I promise I'll make a motion.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So in your packet on page 333 is the timeline for the proposed notice of public hearing for the English language arts and literacy content standards. You'll see that we'll go out for rulemaking here today. Hopefully, we will submit the proposal notice and public comment will begin on August 8th. Again, if you have questions on the timeline, I would encourage you to go back to my flow chart. That would be very helpful in this case. The public hearing date will be held on August 29th. I will open that up. We'll be holding it via Zoom. The final public comment deadline then will be held on September 5th. The adoption notice the board will then respond to any comments that are received during that public comment timeline on our board meeting to be held September 11th and 12th. The economic impact statement that you all are reviewing here today will go to the Education Interim Committee. They have a meeting sometime between the 15th and 17th of September. So hopefully it'll go to them at that time. The board cannot take action on these rules until the economic impact statement is acted on by the interim committee. So that is us, state law. And so it does have to go to them before any action is taken by this board. And so at your November meeting, then you can take action to adopt the rules, dependent on any of the comments that are made and, certainly any additional action that needs to be taken by this board. And then we would submit the adoption notice to the Secretary of State. And then do note that the effective date of the rules is not until 2027. Certainly, I know Board Member Quinlan, Chair Quinlan had mentioned that it would not be effective until after the next 2027 legislative session. And then Chair Quinlan, what did you ask for me to make?
I think you did.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Please do.
I move to approve the proposed notice of public hearing and timeline pertaining to rulemaking in ARM Title 10, Chapter 53, English Language Arts and Literacy Content Standards, and authorize filing of the notice with the Secretary of State for publication in the Montana Administrative Register.
Heard the motion, is there a second?
I second.
Second by board member Neeson. Board member comment.
It's not that I don't think that this is wonderful, but several months ago, you'll remember after we did all our work in accreditation and I had concerns about the additional workload on local districts and especially with one or shared or limited people to implement what we are asking them to do. I think this falls under that, and so thus my concerns, not that I don't think it's good, but I want to make. I want small schools to understand that I am aware of the impact that this may have on workloads. I will keep that concern front.
Noted. And also note that this, we basically got a 2-year window, not quite 2 years,
Yeah.
but pretty close to be able to,
Yeah.
this can't. A lot of supports to do it. A comment earlier was made about the economic impact, and that was intentional. That law change that requires to economic impact statements was meant to, as part of our sunshine laws, to reveal that state agencies that have the ability to make rule, don't make rule in a vacuum, and that there is an impact to the rules that this board makes, and there is a cost that's gonna be incurred, and that's why it has to go to the legislature to review that and recognize that there is that cost, and Lord willing, maybe they're willing to come up with funding it too, and so that's, that's our hope, is that the legislature will come up with some of that money as well, but we don't wanna let that cost interfere with the need to update those standards and get good work done. Other board member comments?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank Maria and Julie for your presentation here this morning before we take our vote.
Any other board member comment? Any public comment in the room? Any public comment online? All right, seeing none, see to a vote. This is vote on the motion to approve the proposed notice of public hearing and timeline pertaining to Title 10, Chapter 53, English Language Arts and Literacy Content Standards, and proceeding with publication, the MAR. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, item number 23, back to you, Chair Quinlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to turn it over to McCall Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your packet on page 335 is a resolution that we reviewed actually at your May meeting. This resolution came to us as a result from the legislative session. There was a bill that was sort of a policy statement. Representative Rexton, as you remember, carried that bill. Unfortunately, did not pass, did not prevail. And she was pretty upset with that. She'd asked the Board of Public Ed in a formal way to maybe carry something, or making a policy statement stating sort of our commitment to reading proficiency and early literacy, given that we were doing so much work around English language arts content standards, the work that we're doing around early literacy. We took some of the language from the bill that she had put forward, worked with the Office of Public Instruction to put some language together, and in front of you is the resolution. And I think it was Board Member Rasmussen, you had asked me at our May meeting, I think this was one of the last agenda items, and I could not remember if I had run this by Representative Rexton. I had run it by her at that time. I had followed up with her because I not remember, she was thrilled with the language. She's still thrilled with the language, and she is eager to hear how today goes. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair, and see if there are any questions.
Any questions or comments from board members? Board Member Rasmussen.
We were talking about strategic planning, looking forward. I think this is part of that.
Any other board comments? Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the resolution to support increasing PK-12 attainment in reading and reading proficiency.
Heard the motion, is there a second?
I second.
Second by Excuse me, Board Member Maxwell, board member discussion. Nobody here, in this resolution, we're talking about chapter 53, which we just discussed, also tying in chapter 55 and chapter 58. And our educator prep program as well with the science of reading. Any board member comment? Any public comment in the room? Dr. Watson?
Good morning, board members. For the record, my name is Rob Watson. That's WATSON. I'm the executive director for school administrators in Montana. Just speaking today to support this resolution, I supported the bill when it came through the session. I will tell you that the notion of the legislature or the Board of Public Ed, dictating strategies or curriculum, it makes us a little nervous, makes our administrators a little nervous. But having said all of that, that's not what this resolution does, nor does the bill didn't do that either. It's basically set on a pathway for the importance of reading and literacy in our great state. So one thing I was going to mention to you all, you're in a very unique position. I just want you to understand your position and where you're at with this. You don't have to look too far about some states that are knocking it out of the park with reading. 15, 20 years ago when I started, Mississippi was one of those states that was not doing well. And we may have even had a few jokes about Mississippi, but we don't do that any longer because they are knocking it out of the park in terms of reading. But what they did is something I think we can all learn from, and that's what puts you in a unique position. They worked on alignment across the state, from teacher education programs to curriculum to strategies to the legislature providing resources. It was 100% alignment in all of those strategies towards a common goal of increasing reading achievement. And that's what puts you in a unique position, because your board touches a lot of those areas, including teacher prep programs and work with the OPI around curriculum standards. So your board is in a unique position to really set this pathway for our state. And I see this as a first step. But I'm encouraged by this, and I do think we can learn a lot from some other states that have gone through this alignment process. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Do you have a public comment in the room? I want to know, she mentioned what other states are doing. It was it's been 3 years ago since I was last working in North Dakota as a superintendent, and one of the things that was happening as I was leaving that was that the legislature mandated that every teacher and administrator of elementary schools was mandated to take a science reading course. And so, and quite honestly, that made me a little uncomfortable as a former math and history teacher, but I was an elementary principal, therefore I would have been required to take science of reading so that I could properly supervise my teachers who were doing this as well. So other states have stepped up to the plate on this area and have a great deal of success. Thank you. Is there any public comment online? Right, so Steve, you have the motion to adopt the resolution before you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. We're now on item number 24, page 336 of your packet. And back to you, Chair Quinlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Crystal Andrews.
On stage. Chair Flowers, Chair Quinlan, and members of the board, my name is Crystal Andrews, ANDREWS for the record. And I am the Accreditation and Licensure Senior Manager at the Office of Public Instruction. So in May, the Board of Public Ed approved the accreditation status for all schools for the 2024-25 school year. A corrective plan is defined in our 1055-60210 as a systematic procedure and timeline for resolving deviations when a school has an accredited with probation status. 1055-6056 States for a district with school and advice or deficiency status, the district administrator and the chair of the local board of trustees shall submit to the superintendent of public instruction a corrective plan, including a systematic procedure and timeline for resolving the deviations noted. In your packet on page 338 is a snapshot of what districts will see in the accreditation platform for corrective plans. I wanted to provide a visual to show the board yet another improvement within our process, as districts are now solely using the accreditation platform throughout the entire process. I feel like I'm always bringing you numbers and words, and you don't really see what this, unless you're one of the districts, you don't get to see what's going on within the system. So this is also how we collected the addendums this year, all within that one platform. So you will also see on page 339 in your packet, a list of the schools that received advice or deficiency as part of their overall rating for the 2024-25 accreditation process, which results in the need for a corrective plan. There were a total of 32 schools with an area of need for a plan. However, 5 of the 32 schools were approved by the board for provisional accreditation and will not need to provide a plan. Those are Rise Charter and Distance Elementary, Rise Charter and Distance 7-8, Rise Charter and Pathways Elementary, Rise Charter and Pathways 7-8, and the Billings Multilingual Academy, all chartered. All schools received a rating of advice or deficient for the student performance rubrics. 2 of the schools received a rating of advice or deficient for both the assurance and student performance rating. No schools needed a corrective plan based solely on the assurance ratings. So to compare to the data from the 2023-24 school year, which remember was the first year with this new accreditation process. In 2023-24, 2% of all schools were deficient. In 2024-25, only 1% of our schools were deficient. In 2023-24, 8% of all schools were in advice. And in 2024-25, 3% of all schools were in advice. This means that 2023-24, 18% of schools submitted a corrective plan, and in 2024-25, only 3% of schools will need to submit a corrective plan. This does showcase the importance of the new accreditation process, providing districts with the opportunity to achieve regular accreditation status through multiple measures and provide continuous improvements. The corrective plans are due on Friday, August 29th. And I will be back in September to share the plans with you and seek approval as the final piece of the 2024-25 annual Montana accreditation report. I stand for any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
And Crystal, the provisionals aren't listed on this piece, is that correct?
They are not within the chart, but they were mentioned in the brief beginning, so I wanted just to clarify that they're there, but they're not being counted and do not need to. I'm sorry, Chair Quinlan.
Thank you.
I'm too comfortable. That they do not need to submit the plan.
Board Member Rasmussen.
The provisional didn't cause any problem in the process or anything like that.
Chair Quinlan, Board Member Rasmussen, no. And they were not, it's not they've been notified to talk through the provisional, but not that they need a correct plan, so they are on track.
Thank you.
Board Member Neesmith.
My observation of what we are collecting it appears to be very broad in that, really a district could take. Please describe your systematic procedure and timeline for resolving deviations in a number of different directions. And I'm wondering if some of the districts on this list are self-reflective enough. So that's a concern that I have. And then also the quality control issues that could create as far as the product that we're getting. Someone could give us 250 words, someone could give us 10 pages. Someone could be extraordinarily thoughtful doing a root cause analysis. Another district could be barely scratching the surface. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful to give additional guidance. I understand that language comes directly from ARM 1055-605. So that's just right from ARM. But I'm wondering if there would perhaps be a space to give additional guidance or perhaps tools to include things like root cause analysis. Having them really identify why the deviation occurred and contributing factors. Actionable steps to correct each deviation, which hopefully would be a part of that plan, right? Assignment of responsibility, who's responsible for this? I mean, this is the procedures we put in place for the ISAP, so this should not be wildly off-putting to these districts. They've seen this before. And then monitoring and reporting on the plan. How is this being monitored? So if there is a plan and if it's just a piece of paper they turn in and then walk away from, how are we actually monitoring? Are we requiring them to do some sort of reporting on progress on the plan? I think even things like school board approval of the plan. So that the local school board is really having to say, yes, we are aware of their accreditation process, their accreditation status, and here's what we're doing to identify root causes and correct, and then identifying perhaps professional development needs, if that's applicable to their specific reason why they're in advice or deficiency, or resource allocation, whatever that is. I mean, obviously, depending upon why they are in that status, that might vary. But I just feel like for districts that are perhaps struggling, if we're a little bit more comprehensive in what we're requiring of them, we would have better, better tracking on how they are perhaps working to address those issues, but also when we see these documents in September, they aren't going to be all over the place as far as quality. Those are my thoughts.
Chair Quinlan, board member Lacy. I was busy taking notes, so I wasn't making eye contact. I think it's wonderful ideas. We can add it right into the system a little bit more. We have contacted all of these districts, but there's no reason why we can't communicate, and maybe informally, the board is requesting a little bit more for the report in September, and this is the best way to gather it. I think that if we're wanting them to not get to that next level, as we continue with conversations today on going to intensive assistance or something else, we do need to hold them a little bit more accountable and just what we're getting. I would say that, and Ellery's here, like when we're compiling what we get, it is difficult. Since, everyone's kind of saying, or like, oh, I think yesterday we heard like submitted the wrong data. Well, okay, so like, what are we gonna do about that, or how can we communicate? So I fully support a little bit more, and appreciate all that wonderful insight, especially from my superintendent. I think that it's great. We will absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I 2 days ago, we had a recommendation come from a Macy member that perhaps we pull accreditation from a number of schools. And that they would no longer be accredited, and that was in regards to their comprehensive support and improvement designations. And there's a lot of crossover between that list of CSI and then the schools on the list. I looked, it's about half, right, that are kind of crossing over in that way. And as we think of doing something that has serious ramifications, I just feel like part of our oversight of that would be to have just as much information as possible. That. And certainly there's other things that might be included if other board members have thoughts. Those are just things that I specifically would like to see in the plans that come to us.
Board member Maxwell.
I'd just like to voice my support for what member Neeskin stated, especially the some sort of either. I don't know if we can require, I'm not sure what the rules are on that to show the board. I do know that my board had never seen the accreditation report prior to me working there, so they didn't know that they should be looking for it. So especially for new board members and turnover, if it become, to remind new superintendents and things that this is something that your board does need to know and be updated on. I'm not, of course, sure the legal, how we can and cannot, but that part I really strongly thought was great. That they are representatives of the community, therefore they should have the information firsthand.
Board member or Chair Tharp.
Yeah, reflecting on process in the past. I know sometimes it can be extremely simple. I know in the past when I had to do one of them was due to a person not having proper accreditation, and it said, yep, we know they'll be fully accredited by December, and they are not accredited, but fully properly licensed by December. Sometimes they're very simple, sometimes they're extremely complex. Speaking of complex issues, I look at this list on these 2 pages here. You see a lot of the schools we talked about 2 days ago, and not knowing exactly the school codes match up, but I identify at least 5 colony schools on here as well. So there's any additional supports and concerns for these colony schools, especially with the potential of Title III monies being still frozen. Do you have any, I guess, without digging in and seeing it specifically what their issues are these due to student performance on the standardized tests by those ELL students? Is that the primary reason that these schools are on here?
Chair Quinlan, Chair Clark, yes, it is student performance, and you have to remember that the student performance is coming from year 1, where we had those multiple measures, whatever they wanted to provide, and in a lot of cases, they didn't provide data or any indication of growth, whatever those questions were 2 years ago. So going forward, hopefully that'll get cleaned up as we move to using our CEEPS assessment, but that is exactly the area that
Their board members?
I guess as follow up then, is there any plan to how to work with those schools on the risk that they may not get their Title III funds?
Chair Quinlan, Chair Clark, yes, I think that as we are hearing more about funding, we are going to play a role in how can we help support these districts in terms of professional development, assisting them in, what is not the assessment, but how can we help them in terms of, what is required for accreditation. I don't think there's any reason to think that if we're working with our small schools or rural schools, that those are included, but they could be specified, or, we could do something separate for those with that ELL, background. Fortunately, that is also a background that I have, so I have some ideas already, but working with the OPI and, others just in superintendents and colonies on what we can do to support, I think it'll be absolutely important.
Thank you.
I just had a question for board member Neeskens. You were reading from the integrated strategic action plan list, were you, when you were talking?
It's loosely based upon what I know is in the integrated strategic action plan. I was not reading directly from
You're
it.
doing a great job.
Yes.
I like the concept of tying the more detailed questions to the ISAP. That brings things full circle. I think that's a good idea. Okay, this is an informational item. Does anybody have any further questions for Crystal? Thank you. Okay, thank you, Crystal. Mr. Chair, we could move on to item 25, the proposed intensive assistance process for accreditation. Crystal, and welcome, Ellery.
Chair Clark, Chair Quinlan, and members of the board, again, my name is Crystal Andrews, I am the REWS. I am the accreditation and licensing manager at the Office of Public Instruction, that I am joined with by Ellery today.
Chair, Clark, members of the board, my name is Ellery Bressler, that's ELLERY, Bressler's BRESLER for the record, and I'm an accreditation specialist for the Montana Office of Public Instruction.
So per ARM 1055-602-21, intensive assistance means a required process for schools and accredited with probation status. Such schools have failed to develop or implement an approved corrective plan to remedy accreditation deviations within the designated timeline. So very fitting in terms of how we're talking through today. Good job, Paul. And according to ARM 1055-605-8-9, a school in deficiency status failing to comply with the required corrective plan shall be placed into the intensive assistance process as defined in the accreditation status criteria reference guide, which must be made publicly available by the superintendent of public instruction. Non-accredited status means that a school in a deficiency status fails to meet the requirements of intensive assistance and is out of compliance with the Board of Public Education standards. of accreditation. So we listened to your very thoughtful conversation these past few days, but and especially on Wednesday with Dr. Virgil about rigorous action and intensive assistance. The message that I heard was that we need to do something different. Setting the requirements for intensive assistance will help support the first steps in change and accountability. In your packet on page 343, you will see a flow chart based on the rules that were just discussed. Now, this flow chart is just a starting point that we sort of, we're working together on. This is all just information and discussion for us to have. But I will turn it over to Ellery to walk you through that flow chart.
Right, so we thought it would be easiest to just give an example, because when you read through without the dates, it gets a little bit confusing. So we'll start with the example of, in May, you guys approved the statuses for all of the accreditation for the 2024-2025 school year. Had we had a school go into the intensive assistance process, we would bring those to you at this meeting in July of 2025. What then would happen is that the school would be required to go into some sort of discussion with a third party entity of the district's choosing from an approved list that conducts a diagnostic review and create an intensive assistance corrective plan. So then at the November 2025 board meeting, which would then be the 2025-2026 school year, the school would present and submit the results of that diagnostic review tool to you all. Well, and then step 3, the school would then present the intensive assistance corrective plan based on the results of that tool to you in January of 2026. And you guys would either approve or deny that plan. So after that, in May of 2026, they would submit to you guys an update with the plan and status, and that status update must include a progress report from the entity that completed the diagnostic review. And then again, they would do that again in November of 2026. So now we're in the 2026-2027 school year. Same thing, they would submit an update to you with the progress report from the diagnostic review. In March, they would do the same thing, March 2027, still 2026-2027 school year. They would submit that update. If the third party entity has reported to us that they have not shown any improvement, then we start the next process. So in March, we give you the information that they have, according to the third party reviewer, we have not seen any progress. In May, we would bring that to you in May, sorry. And then they would have a chance to appeal that. By May, if they do not appeal between the March and May, then you guys would approve to go non-accredited starting July 1st. So they would be non-accredited for the July 2027 or the school year 2027-2028. So this gives them enough time to work on their plan, as well as gives us time to work with them and make sure things are going as expected. If they, in that March 2027 meeting, if the third party diagnostic reviewer says that they are making progress, but we're still in deficiency or advice, they start back again, just continually updating you with an update from that third party reviewer. So that we would call ongoing assistance. If at any time the school goes into regular or regular empty status, then they would activate the intensive assistance process. I can go over it again, it's kind of a lot to the starting point, but happy to take any questions that you guys might.
Board member Maxwell.
I just had a quick question for the third party reviewer. Where would the funding for the third party reviewer come from? Would it come from the district or from the state? I just know, looking at my budget, I can't afford extra paper this year. So if we happen to fall, I would be very scared.
Chair Quinlan, board member Maxwell, it would come from the district, which again is, part of this process and trying to not get yourself into intensive assistance, but yeah, it is district.
Can I just follow up on that one? Who selects the third party?
Chair Quinlan, that would be something that we're going to work with you all on, is getting an approved list. Of course, we know some, but that would need to go through, we'll get a approved list that you approve, that we would provide to districts. So this is just all discussion at this point, but that would be a process that we would work with you on.
Board member Neeskens.
If I'm understanding correctly, this status for intensive assistance would be for schools that failed to submit a corrective action plan, is that correct? Or does it include more comprehensively districts that are in a certain status?
So Chair Quinlan, board member Meeskin, so it's the process that if they have not done a corrective plan, yes, but if they are in, what was the definition, I guess, it's deficiency status. For what, 2 years.
Right.
So we could potentially have schools next year, or when we start
Right.
cycles, that could fall into this.
Right, so there's, I think, 6 schools that are in deficiency status, so if they have the 2-year cycle, they would be in this, but also for districts that perhaps do not submit the corrective action plan, is that accurate? Like they could be in advice and not submit the plan? Was I understanding that correctly?
Yes, Dr. Murdo. Yes, there's 2 pathways into intensive assistance, so you're absolutely correct. So the first could be potentially the 6 schools that this cycle ended up being deficient. Our recommendation in the next board item is that these 6 would automatically be put into accreditation process for next year, given that they've got to make some corrections. If they, after next spring, in May of 26, remain deficient, then they automatically will be put into a process for intensive assistance, which is what the board needs to kind of define what that process will look like. There is also, though, a list of schools who are in advice. Right. And that list is in front of you. Right. The second pathway to get into an intensive assistance is if you don't submit a corrective action plan and make those corrective components and end up still within advice or deficient, then you would go in. With those though, we're not recommending that the schools that are in advice go next year. We're recommending that they go in whatever cycle they're determined to be in within the 3-year span. So they may not be going until 27, 28, they may not be going until 28, 29. So there is 2 pathways in there.
But we would know by August if they have or haven't submitted this plan.
Yes, we
Right, so to answer the question about the cost, I guess, I'm just trying to tie it to that a little bit. There's 26 districts who would have to fail to submit a plan to end up with that cost of that third party provider or the intensive assistance plans. And then the 6 districts that are in true deficiency status obviously need additional thought given to their how they remediate.
Board Member Schmidt.
I have 2 questions. So when do we need to do an economic analysis of this? Is that a part of, it's not a new rule, but it's a new requirement for, I mean. Theoretically, it's a requirement for using district money. Do we have to have an economic analysis of this? So Board Member Quinlan and Board Member Schmidt, and then I want to come back to Hannah's question as well. Well, first of all, I want to address Hannah's question, right? So they submit the corrective action plan, but they still have to, that we will, just submitting the corrective action plan, we're not gonna have a list of schools in intensive assistance come November. What I mean by that is, we've got to give them some time to implement that plan. And we're not gonna see what happens or the ramifications of that plan for some of these schools for a couple of years that are in advice, but we will see it for those that are deficient.
Unless they just don't submit a plan altogether, in case that would be really unfortunate.
Yeah, that triggers a very different conversation, right? The first step is you gotta submit the plan in order for the plan to take effect and be implemented and then monitored.
Right.
So back to Board Member Schmidt's question about the financial impact also. I want to remind you that there are some schools that do cross over in both accountability systems between the federal and the state. If by chance that school that ends up being in intensive assistance is also a school that's in the federal accountability system, which is highly likely, right? Because they're based upon the same somewhat indicators for that proficiency piece. And I can say that because the 6 that are in
right now deficient are also in the federal accountability system as schools identified as comprehensive support and improvement. There are funds available, federal funds that are available to support that. So if we do end up in a situation where it is on the responsibility of the district to pay for this, and they are in that federal accountability system, then we would be requiring them to be leveraging that, because we would not want them to have two separate improvement plans or two separate processes. We would be dictating that the resources they are over here, that resource allocation needs to go to this process as one. Now, however, if a school does end up, because we mentioned, we saw some concerns around results of some of our Hutterite schools, they might not be identified in the federal accountability system as comprehensive. And then that would mean they would have to pick up the economic responsibilities for improving their results. So I hope that helps a little bit. There is an opportunity to kind of leverage some of these funds, and we've actually secured those funds already for this year.
So I guess just to build off of that comment, I just comparing the lists, Parkview, of course, on both lists, federal accountability and also obviously accreditation, Lame Deer, same thing. That's 5 of the 6 schools. I don't think Luster Christian crosses both lists. It looks like it's just on accreditation, not comprehensive support and improvement, which I'm not exactly sure how their federal funding works or if they receive federal funds. I'm guessing not. But then my larger concern is the funds that are supposed to go for like staff development and professional development and improvement, that is, I believe, Title II, and that has not been released. Title 1A has, but not Title II. And so I do have concerns, I guess, at this present time that districts aren't being funded for that purpose.
So we're talking about, yes, so correct, Luster is a private school. We do have a couple of handful, dozen private schools that do apply for state accreditation. If that private school would never show up on our federal accountability system because of their non-public status. I think that you're bringing up a lot of questions that really are very important around, like, if we're talking about school improvement efforts and what is going to need to happen, how do we ensure that the money that the school does have, and looking at that, that the school improvement process actually does merit the outcomes we're looking for, right? And not divert away from the very things that might be bringing those outcomes, right? Because you may, as you go through a gap analysis, determine, for example, that your reading proficiency is where it is because you need to do some deep dives around science of reading and some professional development around that, and maybe a new curriculum. That's what you determine. We would want to be sure that there's some ability to look at that resource allocation and be sure that they have the support that they need. But I think you're right, especially in our small schools, right? And so I think that's why we've got to start to also look at what the small school process might need to be for accreditation, because they may not have the resources for some of these diagnostic reviews. So I do think we may have to look at the state level, if the third party isn't available or isn't financially viable, how do we step in at the state agency, and how do we go to our superintendent and say, what role do you want us to play in that? Because we do have school improvement specialists on our team. And so how could we potentially step in and help with that, so that I would not want it to be that this becomes a financial burden on the very school who needs to be able to have flexibility for those resources to actually implement the corrective actions that need to occur.
Board Member Schmidt. Okay, I just have a comment about the third-party reviewers and diagnosticians. I really hope that when we talk about that list, that the third-party reviewers will look at we'll look at the root causes. You know, if attendance is a problem, why are people not coming? Why are kids not coming to school? Go deeper than we don't have proficient readers. You know, why is that? And then why is that? And then why is that? That's my comment.
So Board Member Quinlan, Board Member Schmidt, this is a conversation we've had very at a very deep level with the accreditation team in particular, is if they're the ones trying to help hold schools accountable, it also becomes really complicated if they're the very ones also trying to provide the support and the diagnostics. So there's a point at which, how do we, if we're the ones holding them accountable, right? Also be the ones to somewhat step back from that and provide that third party view. And the reason for that is, if this becomes a situation where a school might be up for non-accreditation, worst case scenario, play this, the worst case scenario all the way through. We would not want to be the ones intricately involved that said, yep, the reason that you're not gonna be non-accredited has anything to do with us. So there's a portion of that we've been talking through. How do we both provide that meaningful accountability and the care and support, and also be able to somewhat as needed, not be the ones, because what, we don't want them then to turn around and say, well, you actually, the reason we're not accredited is because you guys did do what you said you were gonna do, or you didn't identify the right things, or you didn't give us credit for credit. So I'm just trying to think that through a little bit about what those implications are. And I know the team has brought up concerns around that, and tried to play that forward a little bit as to why a third party.
Board Member Rasmussen.
Thank you. I know that there are schools in the state that have been in intensive, or the version of that name before, years back. I don't see anywhere in here a requirement that you look at other schools and what they did that was successful that helped them exit. You know, and I've talked with superintendents of some of those schools and asked them about the process that they went through, albeit this was, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever. I've been out of this now for 4. But I think that especially if they were colony schools, or they were reservation schools, or if they were small rural schools, or those kinds of things that would have some likeness, that can give some, I think that might be something that teachers from other schools, people that were there during that other process. I'm thinking of a couple of reservation schools that I know were in that boat a few years ago. I think that might be part of the answer, part of the process, so they can understand what it is that they can do and feel like they can be successful, because it's been, replicated before.
So Board Member Rasmussen, and Board Member Quinlan, I think that you're bringing up a really good point, and it references to something that Dr. Tharp said on Wednesday, which is, I do think that we've got to take this process here and come back to somewhat of like a think tank that we have now with our educational partners, with Macy, and really talk about this process all the way through, to consider things that you're talking about. How do we go to SAM? How do we, to provide that leadership support for those superintendents? How do we go to MTSBA to be thinking about the component of the board? How do we bring a strong think tank together to say, how do we provide along this process supports and mechanisms? Because what I would not want to see happen is us to wait for them to fail.
Yeah.
Right? Is that team knows schools are somewhere along this process, it's gonna take all of us to come in, because we cannot just go to these schools also and come top down. It's gotta come from within, and it's gotta be from within the community. How do we help all of us support that? So I really would like the opportunity to potentially propose to the superintendent, like, can we put a work group together to kind of really dig into what this process means, and how do we consider all of those components along that process, so that we don't wait for them to fail and then we're here in 2 years having this conversation that now we've got to not accredit them, or to think that there's a magic wand or a simple solution to what is a very extremely complex problem that you're bringing up, or the Rasmussen around. We've seen some schools that in this process, or in this area, are having these concerns for a long time. And so I think it comes back to what Director Andrew said, is it can't be just the same process that we've done.
Quick follow-up. I wouldn't want us to forget some of the things that we have seen in some of the charter schools, and some of the things that they've been doing to, work with especially teachers and make them more proficient. I think that there's some answers in there as well.
Dr. Tharp.
The easy thing to do would be just to bring a list and say, you ain't getting it done, not accredited.
Yeah.
The hard thing to do is
Something.
is to use every possible effort that we can to help these schools and provide the supports, provide best practices, whether it's curriculum, whether it's technology, whether it's coaches, school board training, administrative supports, you name it, all the different components of it. And I applaud you. We need to do that. The OPI needs to do that. We need to support those efforts. We need to do everything possible to do that. But at the same time, there also needs to be that end result that if you are not getting it done, and this is follow through what we talked about on Wednesday, and I followed up with another gray hair, no hair like me, and he shared that back in 91, when he took over a district, first thing he got was a letter from the OPI saying, you have all of these problems, you better get them fixed or you're getting not accredited, you're gonna have to consolidate in with the neighboring district next year. And he described that the threats have been there in the past, but I think so in some ways, we have tried to accommodate so much, but we need to keep doing that. We need to keep working with and providing the supports, and I like this process of that we're gonna do everything possible. But in the end, that, as Lance described to us on Wednesday, that locally controlled district, controlled by the locally elected trustees, are ultimately responsible for that district. And we are doing a disservice to those students if we don't demand that they get things lined out a little bit better. So I like this process.
Other board members? Board member Rasmussen.
Thank you for bringing up local control, and I think that goes with also reminding us that the lane that we live in and need to stay in. But so thanks for bringing that up.
Any further comments from our panelists?
No, I just wanted to follow up Member Quinlan on Board Member Rasmussen's comment about the charter schools. I agree. We see some really good, strong best practices in there. The partnerships that they've built, whether it's with early colleges or, those models there, we saw them really thinking about how they're flexing time, right? And how they're really looking at the schedules. We saw some really cool things on how they're grading their funding with advanced opportunities and dual enrollment. So we're seeing some things over there that could inform. And so I just wanted to share with you that I resonate with that in thinking about how are we working with the districts around the flexibilities of time and funding and programming to be thinking about those pieces, and then come back to what Dr. Tharp says, right? Like, at the end of the day, we want to really be thoughtful on the support and the systems to help them succeed. And it is the local school district at the end of the day that owns this process for the students. So it's kind of, I think it's really important to have a process that has some meaning to it. I mean, if we're gonna say that, this process is here, we've got to be willing to understand every component, that it's not just on paper, but it is an action that's there.
Mr. Chair, I just add that I appreciate the structure that you've put onto this, because I agree we've had schools in intensive assistance and we've always sort of carried it along without really bringing the components about what school district needs to work on in terms of a corrective action plan. And I like the third party diagnostic piece in here. I think that'll be helpful for everyone. And to get some kind of expert, but outside, a second opinion, so to speak. So this is an informational item, so thank you very much for the presentation. We'll look forward to subsequent conversations. Mr. Chairman, the last item is item 26, and it's a recommendation from the state superintendent, and Dr. Julie Mergel and Crystal Andrews will do the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, board members. Officially, Julie Mergel, MURG, Chief Program Officer, the Montana Office of Public Instruction. Joining with Crystal.
Crystal Andrews and the REWS Innovation and Licensing Senior Manager.
You're in your board packet, starting on page 346, to discuss the recommended accreditation process for the upcoming school year 2025-2026. We've been working with our director Flynn has been on these calls as well. We've been working with the think tank. And as we started to really start to kind of unpack with the think tank around what are going to be the implications when we bring in that 50% of that student performance with our masked component. Do we want to jump in right away? There was questions around that. Do we want to really define what those performance metrics are going to look like? How do we really want to think about that impact? And then there was a second piece around how we really thought through, like with the small schools and all of that. So there was like these multiple components where we were having a lot of discussion as a think tank, where we were like, we just don't want to be rushed to make a decision that we haven't thought through thoughtfully. And so we went to our superintendent. Our superintendent came to the think tank. She spent some time to hear their concerns. And so we've come up with a recommendation to say, let's take a year. We've just gone through 2 intensive years to get everybody on the same page and ready to go, and give them time to improve in those areas where they've seen some, whether they got regular with advice, give them time to get that moving, while at the same time allowing us to be really thoughtful about what it's going to be with this other portion on the student performance comes with mass. That'll give the districts an opportunity to get year 2 through, kind of have more of that implementation and more of that groundwork done, so that then we wouldn't start the cycles for everybody to go through the whole process until 26-27. So we would keep the same groups of cycles that we talked about by the mass regions, but we would not start them this year in September. We would start them in the September of 26 rather than 25. But I'll let Crystal kind of go through with that. But that's how we came to this. It's because of that component on that student performance. We recognize that as those scores come in and as this process starts to come in, we're going to see more schools in deficient and more schools in advice. So we really wanted to be thoughtful about what would make a school deficient overall based upon that student performance. But I will let you kind of share as a result of that discussion and that thinking as to what we are proposing.
Yeah, so to add with that, some important notes there are still going to be off-cycle rubrics that all districts will need to complete this year. Those really being the Infinite Campus rubrics and the EPA. So districts will still have a responsibility this year in terms of submitting something within that platform. They'll be very clear what they need to do and not do within that system. And then as Dr. Merkel said earlier, schools that were identified in deficient status for the 24-25 school year will still be on cycle and expected to complete accreditation for the 25-26 school year, this school year. So schools that are also required to complete a corrective plan, we're not going to put that off. They will need to complete that corrective plan and make that progress, show that improvement during this school year as well. So there will be schools that are, working towards the areas that they need to improve on. As we said, the think tank has been helping with all of these decisions. It's our year 3 with the think tank, and we've come a long way and have really made a lot of great changes, really thoughtful about our small schools, about what is our expectation, and really having that time to work on these rubrics that I feel each year have gotten a lot better. But have that time, all of this will be due at once, not just half and half anymore. What do we really need to get from these rubrics, from these districts? What evidence, what are we just asking for?
or what is really meaningful and what we're, looking to score and review. So that'll also give us this next year, and they've committed, they have, to working with us throughout this whole year to build those rubrics and get a really powerful criterion reference guide that will stay through all of these cycles. So the think tank is reconvening. They've taken a small break, but we will reconvene in August to start that work. They wanted to get started right away, not wait till, closer to next year if this is approved, but to get the work going throughout this entire school year. I think that's it. McCall, I know you have some think tank members maybe.
I invited the think tank members, but I don't see any of them on.
Okay.
Can I ask a question to clarify what you're talking about? What drives this recommendation is MAST and the student performance side of things for the most part. Where do all those rubrics related to family engagement and mentorship and graduate profile, I mean, all those pieces, are you proposing that schools not do that for the coming year?
So, Board Member Quinlan, we're proposing that the entire process of both the assurance standards, all the things you just talked about are sit in that arena, right? And the performance standards, all of that, is really fine-tuned in those reference guides. We don't have a lot of changes or tweaking needed for all the assurance standards that you're talking about. But what we're talking about is all of those things would be rated and used for the entire accreditation process, but not all schools are gonna go through the accreditation process every year now. They're gonna be going every 3 years. And so what we're talking about is that entire process wouldn't begin for a full year. And then when that first full year comes, all of that would be at play for those school districts. And then they wouldn't have to come back to it again for 3 years.
So, just to clarify, if we approve this, all schools would do the assurances. And what would they do with student performance?
So with student performance, we would have to set they wouldn't have to do anything, but we'd be looking at data. Do we wanna look at data over 1 year? Do we wanna look at data over 2 years? How do we wanna look at an average over that data? Because some of the schools are gonna have 2 years worth of data by the time their cycle starts, some might have 3. So we really wanna talk about then, what does make regular versus what makes someone deficient? And so where do we draw that line? So as we think about the schools that we saw Wednesday, when we pulled up that list, like the schools that are showing up as 0% proficient, where do they lie? Do they become deficient? And it's less about them as much as then well, is it below 10% that are showing up proficient? Where do they live? Is it at the state average? Do we want to look at a standard deviation? Do we want to look at the spread? Are you within one standard deviation from I don't even be using so technical terms, but are you at what the state averages is? Are you close to the state average and that's what makes you regular? Are you really far from the state average? Are you 2 standard deviations away and then that what makes you deficient? And so I think that's what that was the conversation that got us into why we wanted to spend this year really defining that, because there's a lot of data there to sort through and think about how does that student performance of proficient or advanced or novice show up, and then where do we rank that on that rubric of who gets a regular advice, who gets deficient? Because as soon as they're deficient in student proficiency, they're deficient overall.
So, just one follow-up. You're gonna do standard setting this summer for the MAST, and based on 24-25 school year data, you're gonna set those cut scores. And so districts will find out when will districts find out with the application of the cut scores, what their proficiency levels are? When will they find that out?
So, Chair Quinlan, they will find that out at the end of October, early of November. They will get where they were for year 1. They won't get for year 2 until, and the timeline will speed up once the standards do get set, it'll probably happen more like August. The following year, so so for this year, it's a little bit delayed because of the standard setting need to occur, that process will speed up. So they'll have that data come November. And then the scores that are being generated this year, we will have in the summer of 26 in August.
Right, okay.
Prior to any school starting the process.
And
for
is
accreditation.
that, fact that we're only, you know, this is our first year of setting the proficiency standards available to schools in November. Is that part of your, why this request is coming forward? All right. Other board, thank you. Board member Neeskens.
I'm just curious if since this board approves the 3-year cycles, if there's been any feedback from any of the advice schools about remaining in advice for some of them, potentially 2 to 3 years, kind of like held in that status because they don't have the opportunity like the deficiency schools to remove that designation quicker. And then as we think about this, that would be potentially with the 1-year delay, that could be up to 4 years for group 3 that they would remain in advice status. If you've received, I'm just curious if any of those schools have voiced concern about being in that status for 3 to 4 years.
So, Chair.
Dr. Martin.
And this is no, we have not, but I think you bring up a very valid point.
Board member Rasmussen.
I'm trying to just think this through. So a school district, which I don't have to do the paperwork anymore, would continue to fill out all the required accreditation, all the accreditation requirements, correct? During this gap year, shall we say, correct?
Just board member Rasmussen, no.
Just the assurance standards.
They have to go in and do the EFA assurance standards, that they're assuring us that they're implementing EFA.
Okay.
And that they're utilizing their funds.
Okay,
They also have to go in and put the data that they're maintaining the ratios, that they've got the licensed teachers. Because what we wouldn't want to do is if the school doesn't fall into accreditation 3 years from now, go back and say, oh, wait a minute, the data back there, right? Because we're gonna take that data that's coming in from Infinite Campus. And we're gonna be looking at, how did you do over 3 years? What was the, like, how, did you maintain those assurance standards throughout those 3-year period of time? And so we want them to, and they don't have to do anything other than validate that that data is correct. Meaning their work is over here in IC, where they're having to put in that data anyhow. And they're gonna be continuing to put that data in. What it means for them in the off cycle is that data does get rolled over into Accred Montana, where they have to go in and double check and verify that that data is correct. So we want to give them that opportunity to look at that data and be sure that it's in there. Otherwise, they would not be inputting any other information at this time.
okay, so
Not just,
they wouldn't be doing graduation rate or anything like that.
I just want to make sure I understood what you just described, Julie. So they're still proceeding with the implementation of the new accreditation standards through your system. But you're not going to sign, you're not going to take it through the rubrics process. Is that what you're saying? It's not going to be scored, so to speak.
So board member Glenn, I think it's I think what you're alluding to is what's really important. We're moving away from accrediting the schools every year.
Right.
To accrediting them every 3 years.
Right.
And so we want to be thinking about their credit, and that's sort of normal, right? When we look at our EPPs, we accredit them on a 7-year cycle, right? And so we're taking a look at, like, when we go to accredit you, predominantly with your data, how did you do over that 3-year period? Right? How are you doing? And then we're gonna require them to provide us that evidence for us to score those rubrics when they're on cycle. So we're not gonna go through the rubrics every year. We're only going to be sure that that data is getting collected. And We want to ensure that the EFA insurance is there so that we continue to provide that report, continue to do that work. But we're not going to ask them to put stuff in there. We're not gonna be scoring until they're on cycle.
So Board Member Quinlan, the only ones that are going in there are the fall data collection, which is what she's saying are the ratios, and the EFA. Not all of the other assurances. And we do have Darren Hanneman, who's a superintendent in Danville, and he was on the task force, so I'm gonna promote him. And if you have all questions of him, he's gonna be on, but he is on, I'm just saying because he's here.
Can I just get one clarification though? When you say the only thing that's going to be put in, you've also said they're still gonna be using your system to update these family engagement plans and, no.
So, no, so, well, they'll always have access to the plan, access to the system, which is important. Because their status is gonna hold. So if if they were defined regularly this year, they maintain that and that information is stored in there. But they won't go in and upload new information until they're on cycle for us to evaluate it.
That's fine, okay. Board Member Neeskens.
I think it's really important to note that we've already approved the 3-year cycling, that
Yes.
already occurred, and really the only thing that we are taking action on is the 1-year pause to begin the 3-year cycles, with the exception of the schools that are in deficiency status. So I think we're getting a little off in the weeds of discussing the 3-year process that we have already approved, and we really need to kind of focus on the 1-year pause to allow improvement in the mass data collection and reporting to better inform proficiency status of schools.
Can I, Chair Quinlan, to go off of that, also it gives time for the districts to work on what they've done these past 2 years. We're not asking them to then, the people in cycle 1, start it all over again. It gives a year to say, okay, how did we do in these areas? Okay, our school climate, we didn't get much back. How can we, strategize to get better results? So in looking at all the areas, we know what they all are now. Give that year for districts, no matter when their cycle is, to really look at it and for us to work with them to say, this year we're giving a lot of professional development opportunities to collaborate with other districts, maybe in their mass regions, to say, okay, this is coming in the next 3 years, this is what we can expect. This year, let's really take some time to plan what can that look like. It gives us time to work with new superintendents to say, okay, we have this year, get you going and get you ready to know what's to come. So it's a great opportunity, not just to say, okay, we have a year off, nothing has to get done, but to really strategize and work with us. We're not going to stop our work of trying to help these districts and support them in terms of what is to come. So can they look at their plans? Should they be looking at them this next year of what they've done? Absolutely. But we're not asking them to redo something unless they're in, a certain status until they are on their cycle. And we're asking for 1 year to have that time to work with our think tank, to work with our districts before we start the cycle.
Board Member Rasmussen.
So I assume, and Darren, if you want to answer this, you can, or you guys, I don't care who does. I assume that the think tank did something as prosaic as create a plus and negative, little graph. So far, all I've heard is everything that's really positive about adopting this gap year. What are we going to lose by not holding schools, not requiring them to continue to look at their data? I'm really concerned about not having to fill in data for a year, because I know by the time we get around 2 or 3 years, I'll forgotten how to do it. I'll forgotten what I need to gather. So what are the negatives?
I'll let Darren answer that question first and the negative, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay. So Darren?
So I think one of the negatives is if you're a new superintendent moving in somewhere, and not having that background information. I know that for us, the negative is that you're not going to get that feeling of, oh, we're done, because we're up here in this first year. But really with this process, there's no way we have to keep going and working on it whether it's we get a year off or not, we're still going to be doing all of the information. I think that the negative that we're going to face right now in our district is just moving from what we do for all the district data that we've been using on student performance. Our negative is going to have that gap, whether it's this year or next year, moving to MAST and knowing how to correlate that for our intervention cycles for all of our kids. That's our biggest negative, and that's going to be a problem. It could be a problem. We'll see how we get it rolled out. But a little extra time to do that for us with a little stronger MAST data might be a huge positive for our district as well as others. Yeah.
Board Member Rasmussen, just to answer your question, our superintendents don't have to enter the proficiency data. We collect that proficiency data and we have that, it'll just be rolled up into the system, so they don't have to enter anything. But I think what Darren is bringing up is really critical, right? Is what data are we putting in? So rather than using this year's data for that first year cycle that comes out in November for proficiency, the first year of the mass data that will be utilized will be for the second year implementation.
Yes, I understand.
But we'll always be collecting achievement data every year
Yeah,
for schools and reporting on that.
I guess you talked about the opportunity to use the year ahead to improve probably the rubric setting, well, not the setting, but maybe the scoring expertise of people who are reviewing it. So will you then solely be relying on this past school year? Is that the set of data that you'll be working with? You won't have a new year's worth of assurance data and to do something with.
So Board Member Rasmussen, we will have, sorry,
That's good. That's okay.
We kind of operate as a pair.
So I think what's really critical is we have lots of data. We're not short of data. So the data that I presented to you, for example, was from Smarter Balance data in 23. We're going to be doing a correlation study with our mass data that we're going to get this. It's already set and ready to go. So we're going to have a whole bunch of data we can be able to look at. So I think it's really important to understand that we also will have the data from ACT for our high schools. We'll have that graduation data. We still have that. We've talked about all of those pieces there that also for the student performance rubric, that when we go into cycle and it all starts whenever it starts, that a portion might also be about giving credit for what you do with your student performance data. Like how are you utilizing that data to inform your instruction? That there could be some points also there. And so we would be looking back to see what did we see, what's the impact of that. And so we really want to take some time to think about when we say student performance and the outcomes for accreditation purposes, and we mark that as regular deficient, are we digging in to look at that data in a really strong way to differentiate between who's regular and who's not?
Other board member comments or questions? Board Member Neeskens.
I just want to say that I've been on this board for 5 months, and in that time I've had a number of districts reach out to me, and 90% of the concerns that they have center around MAST and accreditation and that interplay. And I really appreciate point 3 of the rationale, which is time for OPI to align data reporting schedules for districts who are on cycle for accreditation. So these are, basically all of us, we're all on cycle for accreditation with other federal and state level required data collection so as to minimize data reporting burden for districts. And a lot of the feedback I receive is how time intensive and laborious this is, and how much time, especially small districts, are spending on this effort. And I think that for me, that is the factor that is why I will be supporting this.
Any other board members? Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the superintendent's recommendations for the accreditation process and schedule for the 25-26.
For the motion, is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Dr. Hastings. Board member discussion.
I don't like it. Yeah, thank you. I don't like it. I think it's kicking the can down the road. One, school, I think, I mean, we've never not accredited a school district, so why would anyone be concerned? It doesn't seem to matter what the hell they do. So I am. We need a starting point. We need to hold people accountable, and we need to move appropriately from there on. But, so. To this, okay, I mean, what I'm hearing is. They're still doing everything, right? We're just not basically holding them accountable for the results that occur from their testing. Right?
Still doing that.
They're still doing math, they're still doing everything we want, so. We're still gonna have the data we want, we're still gonna have all that, which, thank God, right, because we need all that. For any type of true analysis. I'm already embarrassed after all of our discussions these last 3 days, the fact that I voted to accredit these schools in May, right? I think there's school districts that shouldn't be accredited right now. I voted for it, I'll own it. I just joined a long list of problems that has occurred for the last 50+ years. With not being able to do that. So, at what point? So with this, to me, it's like at some point we have to start. And so is this more a worry that we're suddenly going to have 50% of our school districts in some sort of advised position, as opposed to now 3% or whatever that percentage is, and we'll look bad as a state? Or is this a time for corrective measure and reckoning that this is the actual status of K-12 in Montana? This is the true snapshot, not some, this is what we want it to be, right? And is that enough to have the investment we need and the effort necessary to correct that? You know, we mentioned the state earlier today that has made great strides. That didn't happen accidentally. And for years made fun of them, right? And so forth. And so for me, it is really difficult for me to support this because I feel it's just another year of postponing what at some point we have to start it. We have to do it. We have to hold accountability and move forward on it. So this is gonna be really hard for me. So, and I appreciate the work and I appreciate the think tank and I totally get it. You know, especially actually, I hadn't even thought about the 3-year window. That just adds to it, right? Because once you're branded and you're there for a while, right? That's a whole nother concern. But again, I don't truly believe we're accurately snapshotting the status of our K-12 currently. I do not, and that is incredibly troublesome. So, I don't know if I can support this.
Remember Maxwell? That much on this.
I'm just thinking, I'm still, sorry.
Remember Rasmussen?
I appreciate you saying that because that's where I am. I remember when you held us harmless, you know, because of the previous test as we moved to the mast. And it seems like we've had just a number of years of where we've been in limbo. And I'm looking at this cycle 3 that's down the road. And I'm thinking at some time we have to get started. So I'm thinking, is the problem here is because we're changing and it's just all mixed up and everything. Should we have maybe not adopted the 3-year cycles until we've done a full, 1-year cycle with everybody and then go to a 3-year cycle? So But now we're gonna, but yeah, but now we're gonna kick the can before the 3-year cycles start. So I have some real concerns about if this is just the consequences of when you move from one thing to another and just put up with it, it'll go away. Or if this is really the fact that some of these schools won't be touched now for 4 years. And I have a real problem with that, you know, really looked at for 4 years. I have a real problem with that. I don't know what to do.
I guess I just wanted to ask, would it be an option for schools that are in advice to request the ability to go through the process this year, that you're gonna have the deficiency schools go through? And would that result in a change, potentially result in a change in their accreditation status?
Yes, it is, and anything is possible. So I will tell you that, and if there's agency that will make impossible possible, it's the OPI. So that said, it'd be possible. I think the piece that would have to really be defined was that student proficiency piece, and I think that that's why we were really thoughtful around, do we just do next year the 6 deficient schools? Because we didn't want to kick the can down the road for them, like, nope, you're going next year, and there's consequences for you going next year. So we did, for those that we knew, we were not willing to recommend to you that they also move down. But we thought about those advice, right? Do we do the same process for them or not? And I think that also becomes a point at which, you know, you've got to learn to keep your accreditation status is gonna hold for 3 years, right?
Right.
And so it's not like we come back and do that. We're asking you to make those improvements authentically based upon the information that you got. We're just not coming back to check on you until, right?
Until it's your
on your cycle. But with this corrective plan, right? We can come back and take a look at, for those advice schools, how did you correct those particular pieces for this year rather than everything? So that's kind of what we thought about. The mission have to go through the whole process because we don't want to delay for them because that's mission critical. And for those advice schools, we don't want to do the full accreditation. We just wanted to take a look at, did you correct the pieces that we were requiring you to correct within this year? And not change their overall status, but rather correct those pieces.
So I hear what Dr. Schlinger has to say. To me, this isn't a reflection of the schools. It's a reflection that OPI is asking for an extension to get their homework. You know, it wasn't a big change. The think tank is asking for more time to be a little bit more detailed in the analysis, and so you know, are we gonna let them get their homework? Are we gonna give them an extra day to get their homework? That's, to me, is that, am I misunderstanding this?
I'm gonna be that.
I think it, board member Schmidt, it is to allow us to get the work done with our think tank, but it's also to give that year of for our schools who just did a huge lift on implementing math for the first time. We want to know that those scores are reflective of student performance and not of something implementing something new. So it's twofold. It's both for us to be able to get our work done, but it's also for our school districts to have had a year to learn how to operationalize something, so that we're able to give them that year too. But we will be using those scores for the 6 schools. So I don't.
I'm kind of I support really all of my colleagues' thoughts at this point. I support validity in both sides. Wanting to give, I really see value in giving schools more time to sit into math and learn how to use it in a more productive way. You know, because it is so new and it takes a long time to learn something to its benefit for students and teachers. But I also just wanted to, as a statement, just to say, you know, it does make me, it gives me pause anytime you kind of push something down the road a little bit, because there is a lack, kids only have so much time. in their careers. And so it always makes me nervous. So that's why I haven't asked a lot of questions. I'm still trying to rationalize that in my head, so.
Board member discussion.
I guess for me, part of my decision is really anchored in the information we received yesterday on MAST. You can see that across the state, it's in a shambles, for lack of a better word, as far as utilizing it effectively with students, teachers understanding score reports, teachers feeling like they have the reports, or districts having the reports and data that they need to really comprehensively use this information. And yet, as part of our accreditation process, MAST data is required to be utilized, as it should be. And I think for me, this is a good, if MAST were in a good place, I do not see the utility of a 1-year delay.
Yeah.
But given that we received that information yesterday, that clearly shows that there is more work to be done, specifically now that we've gotten through the implementation phase to the actual, like, how do we use this? Do we have the reports we need? Are we communicating, are teachers communicating this data and using it effectively to drive instruction, to communicate to students and parents, and time to develop some of those reports that don't exist, like parent reports, or maybe a more student-friendly report. I really think that is the piece for me, of why buying time makes sense. I don't think this is kicking the can down the road to just kick it down the road to give schools a pass. I think it is because we are obliged to make that process and that assessment better for our districts.
Board member Rasmussen.
Thank you. I appreciate your words, because all that's ruminating around in my head as well. And some of that, you know, some of all of that can be partially self-inflicted, you know, by OPI and by the school districts too. So what is my role in you know, helping that overcoming that self-infliction? We've always been so kind, Ron, you know, we have been. But you are going to, I guess these are the things that I want. I want the deficient schools to be worked with, and I want the advice schools to be, you know, reminded that they're in advice. And, you know, this could happen, and they better be looking at things, and they still will have to do their report, right? Their whatchamacallit, yeah, right. So I think with those things that I can see that at least they're not gonna be left totally in the dust. I think I could bring myself to support the 3 years. Second.
Mr. Chair.
If we deny this proposal, the affected group of schools are the ones in cycle 1. Because 2 and 3 get to be under the system. Okay, and the cycles are divided by mass regions, is that right? So there's a whole set of districts in specific areas of the state that will experience a new cycle next year. Okay. Thank you, that's the question. Chris.
Mr. Quinlan, to what board member Rasmussen said about the advice schools, and I just asked Hillary, I thought so, but wanted to clarify. Those that are still in advice, I think every single one did not submit new evidence on their student performance. They didn't do anything to try to get out of that status. And so that's a very easy fix for us to give another time to work with them to say, you know, this is why we were still remaining in this status, and help support that effort. It's not because they scored low or something, like they just didn't do anything to improve that. So as much as that,
superintendent
it could be many different reasons, but that then gives us time to work to say like, okay, this is why, and work with us individually, you know, in this next year as well.
Board member Nuisance.
in light of the fact that these districts didn't do anything to actually try to move out of that status, I'm more comfortable with them remaining in it for a more extended period of time. But beyond that, I think that also speaks to my point I made several items ago, which is I think involving school boards is still critical as part of that corrective action process, because if there is a change in leadership, say at the superintendent level, there should still be some continuity on the board. The likelihood of there being a complete change, turnover of a board and a superintendent is almost impossible. So I think as far as reflecting upon these districts not doing anything, I think if there's added layers to that, it could perhaps incentivize districts to care enough to do that.
That's an interesting point. To comment to that, when I served on the cognitive review team for Clark County Schools in Las Vegas, I got very frustrated with an excuse that they kept using in that, well, we are under an interim superintendent right now. We're still waiting for our superintendent. We're still waiting. It's a give me a break. This is like the 5th largest school district in the country. And you're telling me because you have one office unoccupied that you don't know what you're doing? Yeah, even in our smallest districts, well, maybe not my district with 5 kids, but even in nearly the smallest districts, I still have 3 board members and a part-time clerk who there is gonna be some continuity. Board Member Schmidt.
It looks to me like we're pursuing perfection, and so we're stalled until we get this perfect. And so if we deny this so that people, there's some motivation to improve so that they're not stuck in these categories that, we don't have to be perfect. We all have asterisks on 2020 where this was COVID. We can put another asterisk where, yeah, masks didn't work this year, but we're moving forward. I feel like if we keep our cycles the way they are, then that will help motivate schools and our think tank and everybody else to keep moving forward.
Let's see, over here.
Just one question, Crystal, the schools that are in advice, that was revelatory to me, so that they didn't do anything. If we grant this gap year, is that a hold year for them, or will they still proceed to more than advice if they continue? It will be a hold year.
Additional board member discussion. Any public comment? Dr. Watson.
Thank you, board. Chair Rob Watson, for the record, WATSON. School Administrators Montana, just briefly, we support the recommendation to put the accreditation process on hold. For me, it comes simply down to looking with the think tank over the many months, hearing their feedback, as well as the issues with the mass assessment. It's just not ready for prime time. And I wish that was different, but unfortunately, our districts can't rely on those scores for accreditation, and that's where the frustration comes from. So to put it simply, School Administrators Montana does support the recommendation to put a pause.
Thank you.
Dr. Watson. Additional public comment. Public comment online. You don't mind spending a Friday afternoon with us? Go ahead, Superintendent Hannon.
Coming from the think tank as a whole, I think most of the superintendents that were on the think tank would support the 1 year hold due to the issues with MAST. And one of the things that they did bring up is us that are going to be in cycle 1 coming up this fall are really going to be at a different standard than the group that's a year behind us due to the evolution of our MAST data. So us as a group in group one are going to see a little different part of the accreditation cycle than year 2. Because by that time, I mean, our think tank believes by that time, our MAST data will be very well refined and usable. And by year 3, it's going to be in great shape. So that was one of the concerns that was brought up by many members of the think tank as we talked about this or as we talked about, our concerns, and when Superintendent Headland and the OPI group came and visited with us, and that really was where our recommendation came from.
Thank you, Superintendent. Board members, before we vote, I'm gonna give you a heads up. It's gonna be a roll call vote. I am torn on this. This is difficult. I have many close friends and colleagues that I've known for decades and decades on this issue, including the state superintendent, who has his recommendation. But, and also in light of what we've been talking about the last couple of days, and we need to start doing something. Sometimes. So is it the wrong thing? How much do we pause? That's something we have to reflect upon. Chris, you please. Vote.
Lisa Schmidt,
No.
Julia Maxwell,
Yes.
Madeline Quinlan,
Aye.
Anna Neeskens,
Aye.
Renee Rasmussen,
I think I kept track. The vote is 2-3 right now, correct?
1
3 1,
3-1.
3 1. 3 yeses, 1 no. No.
Vice Chair Slater,
Yes.
Chair Clark,
No.
the vote is 3-3.
It fails.
Or 4-3, I'm sorry. It was
Oh.
4-3. I'm great, that's all right. 4-3. 4 yes.
Okay.
3
We
no.
need to revisit the math standard.
Math is not mine. You're welcome. Thank you.
Motion carries that this proposal will move forward. I've said many times to this board and anybody that I've talked to about this board, that there's nothing wrong with split votes.
No.
There's nothing wrong with having differences of opinion.
No.
We're all going the same direction going forward. We all want the best for our kids, and it is entirely fair and appropriate that we have different perspectives on how to do that. Like I said, with this particular vote, we are putting a little pause, but I think that the OPI heard clearly from this board over the last 3 days that we are not satisfied with the way things are. And knowing the number of people, as I refer to, friends and colleagues at the OPI, I trust that they're not satisfied either. And we're all wanting to go in the same direction to try to get this going forward. We can blame masks this time. We can blame prior leadership if we want. We can blame COVID. We can blame all sorts of stuff. But at some point, we've got to start getting this figured out. And these schools that are continually underperforming need to do better. And we are, I think this board has made a clear statement this past 3 days of meetings that we expect that, and we are going to put whatever policies and procedures in place to get that going. And I'm confident that anybody spending a hot Friday with us online or in the room wants the same thing, and we want nothing but success for our students. And if this moving forward and a pause for a year gives us an opportunity to get things squared away with masks, get some standard setting, get a grasp of this, get some alignment, get the supports into the schools that we need, then God bless the efforts, and we will move forward and we will get things going for our students. And I pray that that is the result of this. Thank you.
Thank
Chair
you,
Quinlan,
Mr.
do you have
Chair.
anything else?
Well, I just wanted to thank you for your closing comments there, and I do not have anything else.
No. Had a full day. Thank you for the accreditation. Future agenda items, Director Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'll see that our next board meeting is September 11th and 12th. We'll be meeting in Dillon. This is exciting because Dillon was the first teacher college. So I think it'll be fun to be in Dillon. I'm hoping that we'll spend some time on their campus. We'll also
Hopefully spend some time reviewing the teacher residency program that I know OPI has had a really good partnership with University of Montana Western. We'll also spend some time in the public schools there. My dad grew up in Dillon, so it's a family there, so I'm hoping to see them as well. So
You're gonna take us fishing?
well, maybe. We'll see. So Mr. Chair, you'll see there too that we'll have a few of our agenda items. We'll get to spend a little bit of time with the Digital Academy. So certainly if there are some suggestions of things that we want to hear from them in light of our discussions earlier this week, please let me know. And you know, per usual, as always, if there's anything that you want to include on the agenda, any hot topic, anything that you want from us, please do let me know.
Also, we have a special board meeting coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On July 28th, on your calendars, you should have at noon that day, a special board meeting for the early literacy, early numeracy integration and early childhood education standards. There is the notice of adoption special meeting. We do have a couple comments for that. Pretty simple ones that I don't think will take much time for you to review. But we will go over those comments, but the intent is to go over the comments and then adopt the notice of adoption all in that same meeting. We have 30 minutes for that meeting and I don't anticipate it'll go longer than that.
Can you repeat, when does the comment period close?
Oh, great. Oh, I am doing the public hearing for that today. And then the public hearing for that will be today at 2 o'clock. And I believe the public comment period ends next Friday. The July 25th.
Okay, so we're meeting immediately after.
Correct.
Is there any public comment? Dr. Watson.
Chair, can I pass
Sure.
Sorry, you might need your reading glasses for this one. Apologize. Small print. As that's going around, if I can, I would just like to make maybe 2 comments about assessment. Because I know it's been a big topic of discussion the last few days. And actually, to be honest with you, we at the School Administrators of Montana, we had a long discussion about masks at our delegate assembly, just because of a lot of the concerns that I was receiving from my members. I don't have any answers for you today, but I do encourage you to have a discussion as a board about the purpose of assessment. I don't think you can necessarily make decisions until you have that discussion. And I bring that up to you for just a real simple reason. I apologize for the short story, but years and years ago, when I was a principal, we were having that discussion with my staff, like what's the purpose of assessment? And some of my staff got pretty frustrated with the discussion, particularly my shop teacher in the building that I worked in. So I asked him, I said, his name was Jeff Stovall. I said, why are you so frustrated with this discussion about what's the purpose of assessment? And he boiled it down to me very, very simple, but I'll still remember to this day. He said, Rob, either the car starts or it doesn't start. That was his assessment. That's how he knew that he was teaching or not teaching. At the end of the day, the car started or it didn't start. And I would argue that you could make the same comment about math and reading. Either kids can read or they can't read. And that should be important to everybody in the state, and I think it is. We have been spending a ton of time arguing over accountability, arguing over tools to assess. But at the end of the day, what's most important to me as a state leader, does the car start or does not start? Can the kids read or can they not? And we can spend all of our time discussing how to measure that. But probably what's most important is for the accountability piece is to figure out how we hold districts accountable for that one measure. And I would encourage you not necessarily to argue over how to measure it. You ask any I would say 95% of kindergarten, first grade, second teachers in our state. You walk into their classroom about the 6th week of school and ask them which kids are on track and which ones are not, they will tell you. And they don't give an assessment, they don't give the state assessment until 3rd grade. But any good early literacy teacher worth their salt can tell you within a few weeks which kids are on track or not. The accountability really has to happen at the local level. Every school board should be asking that question. How many kids do we have that are not on track? Or how many kids do we have are on track? And we shouldn't wait till the state assessment. At the state legislature, there was a ton of discussions about accountability. And for them, it's all about return on investment. If we're going to spend this amount of money, we want to make sure that our reading scores are better. I had to tell the state legislature this year that we can't use the state assessment to measure that. Primarily because the state assessment has changed so much that we have nothing to compare it to. We can't go back 4 years ago before we had early literacy, check the reading scores, and then compare it with what we have today because the assessment changed. So I've been encouraging the state legislature to use the NAEP assessment. That's an assessment that's been given for years. Granted, it doesn't measure at the school level, but it measures at the state level. If you are curious as a state board how our kids are doing, take a look at the NAEP assessment because that measures kids across the whole state. It's been given for probably more than 20 years, and it's a really good assessment of how our kids are doing with reading and math. Same thing with ACT 11th grade. That's a national assessment. Those should be your 3 markers I would encourage you to consider as a state board when you're asking how our kids are doing. With that, the mass assessment, I believe will be great someday. It's just not great right now. And we will continue to support efforts in that. But this is the first year ever that I had superintendents calling me, asking me what happens if I just don't give this mass assessment? What sort of trouble will I be in? And I'm not going to give that advice not to give the assessment, but that's the first time I've had that sort of discussion. Last thing I'll say is just when you have that discussion about assessment, ask yourself, what's the purpose? What's the Board of Public Ed's purpose of assessment? And I would encourage you to ask yourselves if the car starts or not. That's pretty simple for me. And that's how I approach it. Okay, what I handed out was a 1-pager on the conference next Monday. I'm glad to hear that your board meeting is at noon. Is that right, McCall? So I think you'll be ready. You're all welcome to come to this. If you're going to eat any food, I might ask you to register, just so we can pay for food. That's a joke, but we have a ton of great stuff next week. I don't want to highlight all this, but I do want to encourage you, if you can only come for one session or one keynote, please do. You're more than welcome to come to any of this. Got a ton of great stuff from OPI, including CTE updates, OPI accreditation updates. We've got the PARA project, which is an outstanding project that OPI has been working on to get paras certified as teachers. So some great stuff. Kim Popham will be talking about national board certification, which is also a great program that I think our administrators need to know more about. I'm excited. We are doing a new administrator workshop. We have a huge turnover rate again this year, a new administrator, so we'll be doing that. In addition to all that, some wonderful keynotes. I would draw your attention not only to the one on the first day. The Dignity Index is a way that we can have these divisive discussions in a positive way. The one on the last day, which is labeled as student behavior, but that's not a real good title. I'm going to have to change that title. If you don't know Shauna Heiser is the kid whisperer in our state.
Yes,
She's the kid whisperer, and I honestly believe that. And she does a great job talking about strategies and things that teachers can do to engage their kiddos, even the kids that are real tough kids. So that one is an excellent one to consider. And finally, we had made a commitment last year to have Indian Education for All at every one of our conferences. You'll see it again this session. I'm giving center stage to Susie and Mike on Wednesday to talk about Indian Education for All and all the things that Mike shared with you today. But you're invited to any and all of this, and no reason to check in. Just come and sit in, and it's at the Delta starting next Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Any other public comment?
The superintendent, I just wanted to follow up. We received some notification this morning from Senator Dane's office that the Office of Management and Budget from the executive branch has pushed forward Title IV-B funding. So 21st century funding should be coming and rolling out on Monday. And we should be receiving a timeline for other federal funding coming soon. Members of the executive staff, including myself, spent this week diligently contacting our congressional delegation and talking to them about federal funding and timely federal funding. So we continue to advocate for it as a major passion point for the superintendent. So we wanted to follow up with you on that. And thank you all for a fantastic 3 days. Our next Macy meeting is October 1st here in person in Helena. And so we hope to see you.
Thank you, Joe. That's definitely good news about how it's going. Good to hear more. Any other public comment? Any public comment online? Any last words from staff?
So good work.
Lunch?
There's lunch in there for board members to take and run if you'd like.
Thank you all for your great work, and we'll see you online in a couple of weeks. Meeting adjourned.
Board members, if you